Good evening, everyone. Just a quick note to let you know that we will begin a session in a few minutes. But in the meantime, just a heads up in terms of captioning, we will have French caption on the right side of me and English caption on the left side. We also have, if you need simultaneous translation, we also have headsets available at the desk by the registration, so feel free to go and get a headset if you need it. We'll be back in a while. I wish this was further down. Hi, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Ontario Human Rights Commission's Right to Read Inquiry Public Hearing. I'm Michael Harris. I'm the manager of the unit that is leading the inquiry, and I will be facilitating the session tonight. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that Ottawa was founded on the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin people. I also wish to recognize the long history of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people in Canada. You have before you the panel, and I will introduce the panel, and then I will ask the Chief Commissioner to say a few opening remarks. Closest to me is Rima Kaja. She's a senior counsel at the Commission and one of the inquiry team members. To my far left is Nika Farahani, also a counsel at the Commission and an inquiry team member. And between them is our Chief Commissioner, Renu Mandani. She was appointed as Chief Commissioner of the Ontario Human Rights Commission in October 2015. Renu is a lawyer with a master's in international human rights law from New York University. Before being appointed Chief Commissioner, Renu was the executive director of the award-winning International Human Rights Program at the University of Toronto, Faculty of Law. As you entered either at this door or that door, you would have met some of our other inquiry team members, and we thank them for their support of this inquiry. I will ask the Chief Commissioner to come and say a few remarks.
People are already cheering for me. I'm just kidding. Good evening, bonsoir. Welcome to the Human Rights Commission's fourth public hearing for our Right to Read inquiry. I also would like to welcome my fellow Human Rights Commissioner, Violetta Igneski, who was appointed this past January. Professor Igneski has a doctorate in legal philosophy from the University of Toronto and is currently a professor at McMaster University. I would also like to acknowledge in the audience former Human Rights Commissioner Mary Gusella, who is here today, and I think it's very fitting because she was one of the commissioners who approved this inquiry some months ago. This inquiry examines human rights issues affecting students with reading disabilities in Ontario public schools. The Commission held our first three public hearings in Brampton, London, and Thunder Bay. Tonight, we will hear from students, parents, and guardians, and educators who will share their stories and their lived experiences. These hearings are one way we are gathering information to assist with our inquiry. We're also engaging with the public through surveys, meetings, and individual engagements. We've held listening circles with Indigenous peoples to hear about their children's unique experiences learning to read, and hosted a community meeting in Kenora. We are also holding meetings in Barrie and Hamilton. The response already has been overwhelming. We have heard from over 2,000 individuals and organizations. For over 20 years, the Ontario Human Rights Commission has promoted the right to education for students with disabilities. The Commission has been involved in cases at the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario and the Supreme Court of Canada. We have developed policy guidance to help education providers recognize and fulfill their obligations under Ontario's Human Rights Code. Yet we continue to hear from parents, students, and educators that the needs of students with reading disabilities are not being met in Ontario public schools. Ontario's Education Act recognizes that all students must be provided with the opportunity to realize their potential and develop into highly skilled, knowledgeable, caring citizens who contribute to society. Yet, in classrooms across Ontario, there are children who fail to learn to read, a critical and foundational skill. This is unacceptable. We know that students who cannot read will struggle in all aspects of school, from language to math. They are more vulnerable to mental health disabilities, behavioral issues, bullying, and dropping out. People with low literacy are often underemployed and overrepresented in the homeless population and in jail. Many children who struggle with reading have a learning disability. Dyslexia, for example, affects at least 10% of the population. Despite this prevalence, the Commission is concerned that students with reading disabilities are still not getting the support they need. These concerns are all the more troubling because reading disabilities can be remediated with science-based approaches, early screening, intervention, and support. Learning to read is not a privilege. It is a basic and essential human right. That's why last October, the Ontario Human Rights Commission launched a public inquiry into human rights issues affecting students with reading disabilities in Ontario public schools. This province-wide inquiry will evaluate whether the public education system is realizing the right to read. We'll assess whether public schools are using scientific, evidence-based approaches to meet the needs of students with reading disabilities. We're hearing from parents, students, and educators from across Ontario, and we're investigating practices across a representative sample of 8 English-speaking public school boards: Ottawa Carleton, Hamilton Wentworth, Keewatin Patricia, Lakehead, London Catholic, Peel, Simcoe Muskoka Catholic, and Thames Valley. We will assess these boards against 5 benchmarks that are widely recognized as essential to an effective and systematic approach to teaching reading: the use of universal design for learning, mandatory early screening, the use of effective reading intervention programs, appropriate accommodation, and timely psychoeducational assessments. First, we will look at whether Ontario is using curriculum and teaching methods that are effective for the largest number of students. This approach is often referred to as universal design for learning. We know that there are methods that have been proven through research to be most effective in teaching all children to read. In terms of early screening, we know that time is of the essence when it comes to reading disabilities. Our inquiry is looking at whether boards are mandating the use of scientific, evidence-based screening tools in kindergarten or grade 1 to identify students who have reading disabilities. We are looking at the availability and use of science-based reading intervention programs, and we are exploring whether boards provide effective accommodation. Because even with early intervention, students with reading disabilities may require and are entitled to receive accommodation. These accommodations might include assistive technologies like screen readers, alternative formats for assignments, or extra time on tests. And finally, we are considering whether there is clear criteria for when psychoeducational assessments are offered or required, and how associated waiting lists are managed and maintained. Beyond looking at these 8 school boards, the Commission has also requested information about teacher training from Ontario's 13 faculties of education. We may request information or assistance from the Ministry of Education and the Ontario College of Teachers. We have retained Dr. Linda Siegel, an internationally recognized expert in reading disabilities, to assist with the inquiry. And we're hearing from parents, students, and educators through the use of surveys. The results of these surveys will help us understand and report on the experiences of students and assess whether they have meaningful access to education as required by Ontario's Human Rights Code. Many of you here today have already completed the survey, and I thank you for doing that. We will launch another survey for educators in the beginning of April. And of course, we're holding these public hearings. We will release an inquiry report with findings and recommendations later this year. Our ultimate goal is to make the right to read a reality for students with reading disabilities in Ontario. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Commissioner. Tonight, our inquiry panel will hear presentations on issues identified in our Right to Read inquiry terms of reference. We have this space until about 9 p.m. tonight, so that allows us to have about 8 or 9 speakers, scheduled speakers, and then we'll have an open mic session. So we do have some scheduled participants. The participants presenting tonight completed an inquiry survey the Chief Commissioner referenced, and they were selected to make a presentation because they represent diversity of experiences and perspectives. Now, we do appreciate that many in this room may have something to say, something to share with us as well. And so that is why we've allowed for a 30-minute open mic segment, and I know a number of you have already signed up for that segment, so that will follow the presentations. So tonight we're here to hear from presenters. We're here to listen to the panel about the inquiry, or to question the presenters for that matter. Each presenter will have 7 minutes, and I'm going to go off script here a little. This is our 4th public hearing, and I can assure you that none of our presenters has stayed on track. So we're looking to you tonight to stay on track. We're asking presenters to be respectful in their presentation, to not name any particular school or any particular teacher. However, you're free to name a school board. I ask you to speak slowly. As you can see, we're captioning the session, so we ask you to speak slowly, but within time, so that you can indeed be captioned. And as I said earlier, after the official presentation, we will have an open mic session. That's usually 3 minutes. I think during our second session, someone asked me to use the strategy of 3, 2, 1 to let them know when they're getting close to the end. I have not been very good at cutting off the official, what I would call the 8 or 9 presenters, but I think I'm a little bit better at cutting off the open mic, but with some sensitivity because we do know this is an important issue, and many of you have much to say, and we wish we had all the time to allow you to do that, but we do have to work within the time that is allowed. Be reminded that the public hearing, this is a public hearing, it is open to the public, as you can see. There may be some here who are taking pictures, videos. It may be on social media. As you can see, we do have cameras here, so it's being filmed as well. So just to let you know that it is a public event. Anything you say may be on social media. Washrooms are just outside the doors to my right if you need to use them. After about 7:15, and I don't see a clock in here, so I'll have to use my clock. At about 7:15, we will take a break, and then we will continue. I think our 4th session has shown us that some of the issues, some of the topics that you will hear may be painful to some of you, to some of us. So if you are finding yourself in a moment of difficulty because of what you're hearing, please feel free to take some time for yourself, even if it means just leaving for a while, settling yourself and coming back. But do take care of yourself as we go through our session. We're also very mindful of the most recent events of the coronavirus situation. So we are taking every precaution we can based on the Public Health Canada best practices, and we're asking, as you're with us today, that you take those precautions as well. We looked high and low, left and right for sanitizers. And we could not find any, so we asked you to take precautions. And with that, I am going to introduce and ask our first speaker to come to the mic, and it is Chesmak Fahumad Sim.
Thank you, everyone. My printer broke, so I brought an iPad, a computer, and a phone to make sure I could access my speech. Honorable Inquiry panel members, members of the audience, thank you so much for this opportunity to speak with you tonight. I feel quite honored to be here, and I hope what I share will illustrate some of the systemic issues and gaps that are impeding children in this province, including mine, from fully accessing literacy and education writ large, including math. The right to read is a natural right, the same as the right to shelter, food, and clean air. It is a necessary component to an ever-progressing society and an ever-advancing civilization. An inability to access literacy is a human rights issue with lifelong consequences, including the inability to realize all other human rights we are entitled to. My husband and I are proud parents to 4 beautiful children who are currently in grades 2, 3, 4, and 5. My children are bright, kind, socially conscious, and they all sparkle when they smile. I can't even begin to describe to you how much we love them and to what lengths we would go to help them be the best they can be. I am here to speak on their behalf and on behalf of all the province's children who struggle to fully access our curriculum. Our family was created through adoption, the oldest through private adoption at birth, and the younger 3 a sibling group from CAS. Their learning profile is typical of many of the children in today's classroom. ADHD, LD, language and sensory processing challenges, for my younger daughter's speech and language issues, and for all of them, developmental trauma stemming from the loss of their first family. Michael and I feel very fortunate to be at a school where our children are deeply loved and cared for by their wonderful educators, and I'm constantly amazed by their dedication, creativity, and passion that they bring to the classroom. Home and school have been able to work together as partners for the best interests of our children. And I recognize that not every parent can say that. Despite all this, our children are not fully able to access the right to read due to the systemic barriers that exist and our inability to fill in these gaps through tutoring and other supports due to our own financial circumstances. Today's classrooms have a higher needs profile than 50, 30, or even 10 years ago. They're diverse, not just because of our beautiful multicultural society, but due to neurodiversity and trauma. And by trauma, I don't just mean children who've come into new families through adoption. I mean children who are experiencing poverty, illness in their family, death of a loved one, divorce, witnessing or experiencing abuse, new Canadians with all the stresses that that entails. And yes, children in care and those who are newly adopted and who are, due to attachment injuries, trying to process grief and loss while accustoming to a new family. Children, therefore, are chronically stressed due to what's happening in their lives and its impact on their little brains and tender hearts. And yet we expect them not only to learn under these conditions, but to do so with means and ways that do not meet their profile. Research tells us that trauma and loss impact social and emotional maturity, executive functions, and a child's ability to absorb and retain information. As long as our teacher training curriculum focuses on neuronormativity and does not raise a generation of teachers who who are deeply special needs sensitized and trauma-informed classrooms begin to be created, we will continue to fail our children, and the 5 benchmarks that you are assessing will remain ideals that are not accessible. The right to read, therefore, is not just about equal access to education, but about equity in education outcomes. In our case, for example, our concerns for our 2 oldest children's reading challenges went unnoticed by educators who kept reassuring us that we were overly concerned and to wait and see what happens. And despite repeated assertions that my middle daughter's memory challenges and her social medical, not because the teachers didn't want to necessarily, some were wondering if we were correct in our assessment, but there was also no access to these programs in the school, or the access was limited by seat numbers and the number of children needing them. The LST at the time was also not deeply engaged, and we were not at all informed about supports within the school, such as reading, screening, or reading intervention programs. So my suggestion would be that teachers need to heed concerns expressed by parents who notice their children struggling, and they need to have the training in order to notice, assess, and intervene as early as possible. And LSTs, we would benefit from deeply engaged and proactive educators who tell us where the problems lie and how to try and solve them. The third issue I'd like to point to is the chronic underfunding and under-resourcing of our education system, which has reached a crisis point. Children who benefit from mandatory early screening and reading intervention programs that meet needs, not available spaces. For example, thanks to the efforts of our wonderful LST and administrators, Empower finally came to our school this year, but it's only available to 6 children. How could it be that there aren't more children who need to access this program? Thankfully for me and my husband, 2 of our children made it into the program. But what about all the other kids? And my younger son, who is exhibiting dyslexia, was not included because he had not yet gone through the tiered interventions. And my concern is, by the time he does, it might be too late. While I'm touching on underfunding, I'd also like to address the issue of violence in the classroom and its impact on teachers and peers. While these are very important and real concerns that need to be discussed and addressed in a multiplicity of ways, I believe we also need to consider this issue from the point of view of the stressed little child who's communicating through their behavior. I can speak personally to this issue because my younger daughter struggles with self-regulation. In senior kindergarten, this resulted in her classroom being evacuated on a regular basis. But not once did the school call and ask us to come and take her home. Not once. Together with the principal, we organized a meeting with her occupational therapist and her attachment therapist, thinking that her teachers, hearing from them, would help them to understand how to meet her needs. When we showed up to the meeting, it was moved to the library, and not only her teachers, but all 4 children's teachers and all the EAs, and as many other people who were available showed up. They wanted to learn about our children's needs and to put in place a process and a program that will allow our daughter to succeed and thrive. And to this day, when she is triggered, wonderful educators mobilize to help her. We've done what we can do to bring special needs and trauma-informed information and resources to the hands of our children's teachers. And honestly, I can't put into words how grateful is creating a multi-tier system with differential impact on students. Neuronormative kids will continue to excel academically and into their future. Their outcome, and while the outcome for special needs children will depend on their family's financial ability to access tutoring and other supports, and or their ability to advocate. This is problematic because it does not provide an equitable playing field nor a fair outcome. Many parents of children with dyslexia and other learning differences are having to turn to expensive tutoring programs that cost upwards of $500 a month. Those of us who cannot afford these costs are frustrated that reading is an essential need in parallel with the public school system. But there is hope, because we are here to speak for our children, and you are here to speak for us. And together we can find solutions. And if I may end with a quote by UNESCO, which was said on April 18th, 2013, "Literacy is a fundamental human right and the foundation for lifelong learning. It is fully essential to human and social development in its ability to transform lives." Thank you. I wish I had my camera. Let me get it.
Okay. Oh, thank you. I think the panel may have some questions for you.
Thank you so much. There's so much that I could ask you about. I guess one thing that really sticks out from your presentation and meeting your wonderful children is, you're dealing with 4 children who have unique needs, and with a strong advocate, but without a lot of financial support to do the tutoring and all of these things. What has the cumulative effect of this been on your family? What has the impact been on your family life?
Very stressful, because there's 4 children and you want to be able to meet all their needs, and there's limited time and energy and resources. We do as much as we can. Each of them has to read a certain amount of time every night. They have homework that we're trying to get them to do. There isn't, in my view, enough homework, even like 10, 15 minutes, but just even getting to read with them, to do the flashcards with them, to do all the things that are needed to help support those, that ability to build on their reading practice. All of that takes a lot of time. And I'm not saying we shouldn't spend time, that's our job as parents, right? But when it's multiple children and you have those needs that are there, it can become exhausting. And I think this is part of the thing that we have to be mindful of as well, is when parents become discouraged, that's really unhelpful. Thankfully, my husband and I are like super positive people, and we are able to maintain that positivity and keep going. And we've been able to access some resources and able to help us at home. So there's an extra person on hand to read with the kids. But I have found it stressful because it never feels enough. I'm not a trained teacher, right? And since our children joined our family, I feel like there's been this constant advocacy, which also can burn you out. I'm expected not to just be the parent, but to be the OT, to be the psychologist, to be the speech therapist, like whatever professional you go to, they hand you something. And so then it becomes like a lot to do. And as far as the reading is concerned, that's where I'm puzzled, because when I learned English as my 3rd language, I learned to read and write in school, And so that was something that was incorporated in the school, and there was a system to teach it. And now I feel, in a sense, some things are being coming out of the school and put onto the home, which is fine. We have to work together, but I'm not a teacher. I don't know how to teach phonics. So,
You talked about developmental trauma, and that's very important for us to hear about, because we don't hear about it a lot. We've also heard, though, from other parents that the whole experience for children not learning to read is quite traumatic as well. Like, it becomes a real issue of self-esteem and so on. How do the two combine? How do you deal with that situation where the child already experienced trauma and now there's more trauma happening because they see themselves falling behind in school?
So I think this is such an important question, because everything is so interconnected when you raise that, right? Children who are experiencing developmental trauma, are more at risk of learning challenges, right? The brain is wired differently. So the ability to absorb information, retain it, there's going to be memory challenges, there's language processing issues that come with that. And then it becomes this vicious cycle, because when you're not able to gain that information in the same way as your peers, it can begin to affect your self-esteem. And then when that happens, then there's going to be school resistance, then there's going to be that why, and why am I different, you know? And the way that I try and frame it with my kids is like, I don't even like the word disability, I like difference. That we all learn differently, you know? Some we have strengths here, some we have strengths there. And I think what we need to do in our school system is, if we are trauma informed, then we can, you know, when we worked with our kids' teachers to help them understand like why is my child having difficulty with this particular thing, and when we put in suggestions on how they can approach the learning in a trauma informed way, see changes. And so I think that's the main thing, is we have to ensure that our children's self-confidence and self-esteem is maintained. And we do that by making learning accessible to them, so that they can be like, I can do this. Because when you know that you can do something, you do it. If you begin to feel like there's impediments, learned helplessness sets in, paralysis of will sets in. And so that's the other really important dimension of this.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Amélie Lavectoire.
Thank you for inviting me to share my thoughts and experiences with you. I will make my remarks in French, so for those of you who need headsets for translation, I'll invite you to go get some. But I will say from the outset that I will invite your questions in either official language. Mon nom est Amélie Lavictoire, je suis résidente de la ville d'Ottawa. J'ai un enfant de 11 ans qui fréquente le Conseil scolaire catholique francophone de la région. J'ai beaucoup de choses à vous raconter, mais on m'a donné 7 minutes. Un grand défi, en plus qu'on me demande de parler lentement. Pas une chose facile pour une francophone. Alors, je vais omettre certaines choses. Je vais omettre un survol du délai à dépister chez mon enfant, une dyslexie modérée et une dysorthographie sévère. Je n'aborderai pas comment des troubles de lecture peuvent se manifester par d'autres comportements qui ont fait en sorte que nous avons investi de nombreuses années et beaucoup d'argent à poursuivre des pistes qui étaient les mauvaises, jusqu'à ce qu'un intervenant privé nous recommande une évaluation psychoéducationnelle à l'âge de 9 ans et demi. Vous avez entendu parler de coûts, de délais, de l'impact qu'un manque de ressources et services peut avoir sur un enfant et sur une famille. Mon objectif aujourd'hui va être de vous offrir la perspective des francophones devant naviguer le système d'éducation en Ontario lorsqu'ils sont confrontés à des troubles d'apprentissage liés à la lecture. Je vais également conclure avec quelques constats généraux que j'estime importants. Mon enfant a un droit constitutionnel à une éducation de qualité égale à celle offerte en anglais. Parfois, par contre, pour atteindre l'égalité, certaines ressources et services ont besoin d'être adaptés pour répondre aux besoins de la minorité ou même être rendus plus facilement accessibles. Je m'explique à l'aide de 2 exemples. Le premier exemple porte sur les listes d'attente pour des services tels qu'une évaluation psychoéducationnelle ou des services d'orthophonie, qui sont beaucoup trop longues dans les 2 langues. Mais lorsque confronté à un délai de 2 ans pour une évaluation psychoéducationnelle ou des traitements aux frais d'un conseil scolaire, le parent anglophone peut beaucoup plus facilement, si les moyens lui permettent, se tourner vers le privé pour obtenir un test, des traitements ou du tutorat. Selon la région, et encore selon les ressources financières, le parent francophone fait face à une absence de services offerts en français ou privé. Et lorsqu'il existe, la demande pour ces services est tellement plus grande que l'offre que les listes d'attente peuvent être quasiment aussi longues que celles offertes au sein du conseil scolaire. Et n'oubliez pas, lorsque je dis ça, j'habite dans une des régions les mieux desservies en français, une des régions les plus francophones de la province. Imaginez ce que serait ma situation si j'habitais dans le nord-ouest ou le sud-ouest de la province. Mais qu'importe, un enfant dont la langue maternelle est le français doit être évalué en français. Si le service n'existe pas dans la région ou qu'il y a une pénurie de fournisseurs, les parents francophones doivent attendre et attendre, lorsqu'on sait très bien que tous les jours comptent lorsqu'il s'agit de l'éducation de notre enfant. Mon deuxième exemple peut sembler anodin pour ceux qui ne sont pas familiers avec les troubles de lecture, mais c'est d'une importance cruciale lorsque notre enfant a la dyslexie. C'est l'accès à des livres. C'est simple. On nous a fortement encouragés à fournir à notre enfant des livres qui sont à la fois audio et numériques, afin que notre enfant puisse voir à l'écran les mots qu'il entend pour mieux apprendre à lire. En consultant les collections en anglais, j'étais encouragée. Je voyais plus de 300 livres pour les pré-ados et les ados, de tous les genres et de tous les styles imaginables. Lorsque j'ai fait la même recherche pour des livres pour pré-ados et ados en français, 3 livres. Les livres audio numériques en français pour les pré-ados et les ados sont quasiment inexistants. Lorsqu'il existe une sélection, l'enfant est entièrement privé de son choix selon ses intérêts, ce qui rend encore plus difficile le développement d'un intérêt pour la lecture et l'amélioration des habiletés de lecture. Mon enfant arrive bientôt à l'âge des comptes rendus de livres, les fameux book reports, où on donne à tous les élèves de la classe de français le même livre papier à lire, analyser et résumer. Par pur intérêt, j'ai vérifié la disponibilité en format électronique des livres analysés dans les classes de mon enfant aîné, et aucun n'est disponible en français en format numérique. Ce qu'on va faire lorsque mon fils arrive à ce niveau, j'en ai aucune idée. Depuis son diagnostic, de nombreuses ont été les fois où j'ai pensé si seulement mon enfant était anglophone. Ou est-ce qu'il serait préférable, contrairement à mes propres valeurs, d'élever mon enfant en anglais, afin qu'il puisse avoir accès à plus de services et de ressources? Je peux très bien voir que la pénurie de ressources et de services en français pour les enfants avec des troubles d'apprentissage entraînerait plusieurs parents et enfants de se tourner vers les ressources en anglais, le système d'éducation de langue anglaise, et vers l'assimilation linguistique. Dans la formulation de vos recommandations, je vous encourage fortement à tenir compte de la réalité et des expériences des enfants et des familles francophones de l'Ontario. Je vais terminer avec 2 grands constats que je trouve importants et que j'aimerais souligner. Le premier est l'importance d'un parent éduqué qui est capable d'être la voix de son enfant. On ne peut jamais lâcher prise comme parent d'un enfant qui est atteint d'un trouble de lecture. Mais pour être la voix de son enfant, on doit être éduqué nous-mêmes. On doit connaître les droits de notre enfant, les obligations du conseil, les mesures et les ressources disponibles en place. Et sauf si on a la chance d'avoir des enseignants très connaissants des troubles de lecture, l'éducation des enseignants est à refaire à tous les années, à tous les semestres, pour expliquer les mesures d'accommodement requises et les besoins de notre enfant. Il existe également un manque d'information et d'appui pour naviguer le système d'éducation après un diagnostic et lors d'étapes charnières, la transition du primaire à l'élémentaire, de l'élémentaire au secondaire, du secondaire au post-secondaire. Et si les ressources existent en anglais, elles sont rares et difficiles à trouver en français. Les ressources québécoises, les ressources provenant de la France ne sont pas pertinentes ou applicables à notre situation. Et c'est souvent ça qu'on nous réfère. On nous dit, bien, allez regarder la situation, les ressources qui sont disponibles de la France. Il n'y a aucune pertinence à ces ressources-là pour un franco-ontarien. Le deuxième grand constat tiré de mes observations est que les écoles et les conseils scolaires doivent fournir un appui, ce que je vais appeler un appui social ou psychologique, lors de la préadolescence et l'adolescence surtout, pour s'assurer que l'enfant veuille utiliser les ressources et les outils qui sont mis à sa disposition à l'école. Comme on sait tous, la préadolescence et l'adolescence est le stade où on veut à tout prix être comme les autres, ne pas paraître différent. Alors, ça mène souvent au refus d'utiliser les outils qui sont à la disposition de l'enfant, et ça perpétue un cercle vicieux. Rien ne semble être fait pour activement, mais surtout proactivement encadrer et appuyer les élèves de l'élémentaire et du secondaire à vivre et répondre aux pressions sociales qui découlent d'être le seul élève dans la classe qui utilise un ordi le seul qui a le droit des logiciels de prédicteur de mots, le seul qui porte des écouteurs afin d'écouter un texte qui lui est lu. Beaucoup de ressources sont investies au niveau primaire, et c'est important qu'elles le soient, mais afin que cet investissement porte fruit à long terme, il ne faut pas perdre de vue que nos pré-ados et nos ados vivent dans un environnement social complètement différent, où les pressions pour la conformité sont énormes. Merci. Did I make it under 7 minutes?
Yes, you did. Yes, you did.
Merci beaucoup, Amélie. Comme vous avez parlé beaucoup de la réalité des francophones en Ontario, je voulais vous donner une chance de parler de votre réalité comme famille, l'expérience d'être un parent d'un étudiant ayant des troubles de la lecture.
Oui. Bien, en fait, notre expérience, pour nous, un diagnostic de trouble de lecture a été un changement de jour et nuit. Mon fils, en fait, c'était plutôt nous, on s'est rendu à un diagnostic parce qu'on avait consulté au privé pendant des années pour des problèmes de comportement pour lesquels on ne trouvait pas la source. Et après des années de tout essayer, toutes sortes de traitements et de thérapies, on nous a dit, allons voir si peut-être il emmagasine une frustration tout au courant de la journée. Et justement, on nous a proposé là, ça va me rendre émotionnelle, là, mais on m'a proposé une évaluation psycho-éducationnelle après que ça faisait 5 ans que je demandais aux enseignants, tous les années, si ce que je voyais quand mon enfant lisait et l'écriture que je voyais était normale. On me disait qu'il était paresseux. Excusez. Mais en fait, le diagnostic a fait tout un changement. Mon fils n'est plus le même enfant, il a beaucoup plus de confiance. Ses résultats scolaires ont monté en flèche. Mais la clé, c'est qu'ils veulent continuer à utiliser les outils. Et c'est le volet social qui va faire la différence.
It's okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
So our next speaker is Tanya Smutilo.
Thank you for the opportunity to tell my story. This is an issue that I've been struggling with my whole life. As a child with a learning disability, and now as a parent of 3 boys who have similar challenges learning to read as I did. I was diagnosed with dyslexia in grade 2 and struggled through elementary and high school. I remember feeling like I was lost in the dark and everyone around me had a flashlight and could see their way. Eventually I gave up, and it wasn't until I was in my 20s and went back to university as a mature student that things clicked for me and I began to love learning again. I made the dean's list and then went on to graduate school. Now, as a parent, I am seeing my 3 beautiful boys struggle as I had. My eldest is Isaac, who's in grade 8 and diagnosed with ADHD and dyslexia in grade 2. My middle son, Jesse, is in grade 6 and diagnosed with dyslexia in grade 3. And my youngest, Sam, is in grade 2 and hasn't yet been diagnosed, but showing similar challenges as his brothers. We plan to have him tested in the spring, but are waiting to get that done. All their psychoeducational testing has been done privately because the wait list to do it through schools is too long. It will take years. And luckily, we have insurance that covers the bulk of that cost. All 3 of my boys were confident and happy kids when they entered JK. They loved books, and they were really excited to learn to read. And we've watched this confidence fade as they move through elementary school, and how disappointed they were, not understanding and not being able to learn to read. While they all excel at non-academic activities, and such as sports and visual arts, I now hear all of them routinely say that they are the dumbest kids in class, that they hate school and they hate learning. Our story is similar to others who've spoken, with one difference. We're in Ottawa, and in Ottawa, French is highly valued and really essential for career development. As a result, in Ottawa, Early French Immersion, or EFI, is the program of choice. It has become the mainstream in our elementary schools. For example, in the fall of 2019, in my children's school in the Ottawa Carleton District School Board, there were 659 students registered in the EFI program, and only 164 registered in the English program. So as public servants, my husband and I see how important French is in the workplace, decided to put our children in the EFI program at our community school a few blocks from our house. Kindergarten was great for all of them. They made lots of friends and had really great teachers. There were no significant issues raised. Then came grade 1. This is the year they started hating school. In the EFI program, grade 1 is all in French. This was the year that their teachers flagged concern that our boys were a little behind their peers in learning their letters and sounds. When we asked if there were supports available to help them, we were told that the learning resources available were only offered in English. And because grade 1 is only French, we couldn't access them. The intervention offered was to move them into English. And over the years, it has been our experience that this is the first line of intervention offered to your child if they are diagnosed with a learning disability. As a result, kids with LDs are overrepresented in the English program at our children's school. The school developed an IEP and IPRC for our oldest son, Isaac, in grade 2, but they continued to pressure us to move him into English. While there were some accommodations in place for him, there were no reading interventions available for him in French. He was given access to the level literacy intervention, which is their first line of intervention, in grade 3. But that basically just taught him how to memorize a book and not how to learn to read. So he stayed in the EFI program until grade 3, and he was still struggling academically, and he started to have some behavioral issues. By October, his teacher refused to have him in her class any longer. In our last meeting with her, she said that, and I quote, "French just isn't a good fit for him. It's like putting a kid with a physical disability in a sport camp." So we obviously couldn't leave him in that class. And the school wouldn't let us move him to another EFI class, so our only choice was English. Or medicate him, which we weren't ready to do at that time. So we moved him into English, and he continued to struggle, both academically and then socially. This was devastating for him because being taken away from his friends and still not having success was really hard on him. And it was at this point we decided to try medication. And it did make a big difference for him. Once in the English program, he got access to the LLI. He's now in grade 8 and in the English program and working at grade level. While doing fine academically, socially, he feels very isolated and has very poor self-esteem. He wasn't able to maintain friendships with the kids in the EFI program. Because his cohort in the English stream is so small, he doesn't have much in common with the kids in his class and hasn't made many friends. He has come home from school saying kids make fun of him for being in the English program. And when I tell him how smart he is, he says, "If I'm so smart, why am I in the English program?" Also, since moving into English, he has really had the opportunity to go on field trips, rarely has homework or projects, and we have very little communication with his teachers. When we ask about accommodations, we're told that they don't need accommodations because those are just good teaching practices. So we have no idea really how he's being accommodated in those classes. So moving on to my middle son, just given our older son's experience, we hesitated and discussed the option with him, and he said he'd rather die than move into English, because in his words, that's where all the kids with problems go. So we've kept him in French with a modified curriculum. We got him a tutor and continue to advocate for him to get access to supports. And we're continually faced with teachers who are reluctant to accommodate him, who sometimes lack empathy and patience, and who have no idea how to support him or differentiate the curriculum for him. And I think this is because by grade 6 in particular, there are very few kids with learning disabilities left in the French stream. And so this year his teacher actually asked me if I had any ideas of interventions or things that she could do to help support him. And I'm not a teacher. I have no idea. So every year we've asked for the Empower program. And it wasn't until this year that it was ever made available to Jesse, now in grade 6. And he started that in the fall, and we've seen a huge difference in his reading. So we're having the same struggles with our youngest, who's in grade 2. And the school has suggested we move him into English, and we've said no. Now this is my 3rd time around, and I know the key is to keep advocating for him and keep bugging them to give him supports. So he was, at the beginning of grade 2, he was admitted into the LLI program. And again, it hasn't made much of a difference in his reading. The teachers have just done an educational assessment using the Wyatt program for him, and we're waiting for the results. And they just started offering Empower program to the primary grades in their school. And so he was just now, last week, started an Empower program that will go till the end of the year. So because of the lack of supports at school, we've been paying for a tutor to work with the boys once a week, and this has been a big financial burden. And we would love them to do an evidence-based intervention in the community, such as the Orton-Gillingham program, but at this point we're not able to afford that. We know that Jesse and Sam may have an easier time in English academically and may get more support, but one of their greatest strengths at school, and the thing that keeps them going there, is their friends. And they also really want to learn French and go on field trips and have the same enriching experiences as the kids in the EFI program. I want these things for them too. I want them to have a big group of friends and be exposed to a variety of learning styles and role models. It's a really hard decision keeping them in the EFI program, and we don't want to perpetuate stigma associated with the English program, but at the same time, we don't want to move our kids to a program that's socially isolating, where they don't get the same opportunities for enrichment. We don't know what the right thing to do is, and having to make this choice seems unfair. We wish our kids could be supported regardless of the program that they're in. To make this decision easier, we'd like to see more efforts to keep kids in the EFI program despite having a learning disability, and more done to integrate the two programs so that kids in the English program are not as socially isolated and stigmatized and can become part of the mainstream programming.
I just want to pick up where you left off and ask you, what do you think could or should be done within the EFI program to ensure that your kids could learn to read and thrive in that program?
Well, I had thought that it would be great if there were interventions in French, like the Empower in French, but after the last presentation, that's maybe why there aren't any. So, yeah, I think the key is maybe to break down that separation between the two. You know, we're supposed to be having an integrated system, education system, where kids with learning disabilities are integrated throughout the mainstream program. Well, if in Ottawa the mainstream program is French immersion, they need to do more to integrate and keep kids part of the mainstream community in the school.
Thank you.
Thank you. So our next speaker is Michelle Ons.
Totally out of my comfort zone here. I'm here tonight. My name is Michelle. I'm here tonight with my husband, Dan, and my 13-year-old son, Dylan, who is the reason why we're here tonight. He has struggled since the early days of school in the OCDSB public school system. I never would have imagined that signing my smart, funny, and gregarious 4-year-old up for junior kindergarten back in 2010 would lead me here to the OHRC Right to Read inquiry. But here we are. I've been following the inquiry, and my heart breaks hearing the same story over and over again. But I'm thankful that so many parents and children are finally being heard, and I'm very hopeful that we can effect some changes. In order to pull my thoughts together so that I'd have something to say here tonight, I started going through grade by grade, trying to remember how we got to the point where we are now. It was then that I realized we spent from kindergarten to grade 3 in the EFI French immersion program, hearing things like ADHD, not participating, distraction to others, and class clown, but never learning disability, and definitely never dyslexia. We began to hear terms like IEP and LLI, but not scientific multisensory evidence-based support. We heard learning to read becomes reading to learn, and if you're behind, you will continue to fall behind. It was during this time that our older son would come home and say, "I saw Dylan sitting in the hallway or the office again today." Interestingly, Dylan was often with another student who was also dyslexic. They had both learned by this point, grade 2, that it was easier for them to be the bad kid or the class clown than it was to understand and complete the work put in front of them. They had found a way to get away from the shame they felt in not being able to do what everyone else was doing. It was also in this time that I first heard the term psychoeducational assessment. Did we have the means to get one done privately? We could put them on the wait list, but it might take years. We were lucky. We had benefits that would at least partially cover the assessment. It was in that first psych ed assessment that we first heard the term learning disability connected to our son. Yes, ADHD was in the report, but most of the recommendations in that regard included allowing more movement, body breaks, and more fidgeting, not less, as the school had been doing. As for the learning disability, the assessment recommended that Dylan be identified as an exceptional student learning disability to ensure that he's able to access the necessary support, programming, and resource help for development of reading, math, and written expression skills. It also recommended assistive technology to access the curriculum and a multisensory reading program. This assessment also asked that we give careful consideration to moving Dylan to the English program from French immersion, something we really didn't want to do. So here we were in grade 3, hearing the term learning disability applied to our son for the first time. We were worried, but relieved that we had some better direction on how to help Dylan. This information was shared with the school, and a new IEP was created, LLI reading intervention was continued, and a Chromebook was requested for Dylan. We trusted the school system, the educational professionals, to know what to do with this information. Sadly, most of their efforts made things worse for Dylan instead of better. The LLI intervention only intensified his feelings of inadequacy as he was pulled from his regular class to sit in a small windowless room reading the same leveled readers over and over again. The IEPs seemed to simply reduce the expectations and modified the curriculum for him instead of supporting him to reach his true potential. My deep dive into learning all that I could about learning disabilities and ADHD also began around this time. I learned about the science of reading, Orton Gillingham, Barton reading, all about spelling, Davis dyslexia correction, NILD, and then I happened to hear about the Empower Reading Program from a young woman who had been a subject in the research project at St. Kitts Hospital in Toronto. I heard that some of the schools were now offering this program, including schools in the OCDSB. She had nothing but good things to say about the program. It had changed her life, and she was now completing her master's degree. You can imagine my surprise to find out that this program was actually available at Dylan's school. No one had ever mentioned it to us, nor thought to recommend Dylan to be part of the program. The principal was unsure of Dylan's suitability for the program because of his ADHD. This was the year that I truly became that mom. And I was able to get him into the class for the next school year. And though I don't think they came right out and said it, we definitely felt that he would not be included in the Empower program unless he moved to the English stream, where there would be more support available. Despite not really wanting to move Dylan out of the French stream and away from his friends that he'd been with since JK, we decided the Empower program was too important to miss out on. After a bit of a rough start in Empower in grade 4, including a phone call saying they may have to remove him from the class as he was a distraction to others, the teacher persevered, and Dylan had the most successful school year he's had yet. He was getting it. He was finally feeling some success in school, and we could really see a change in him. It was nice to see that there was a way to help him. With an evidence-based, multisensory program, the letters on the page were finally making sense. He can decode words quite well now, though fluency and comprehension are still a stumbling block. Unfortunately, this was the last time Dylan felt successful in school. In grade 5, in the English class, Dylan was no longer part of the Empower program and was left to struggle in a grade 5-6 split class, away from his peers, feeling like the dumb kid again. Daily phone calls home with complaints of headaches and stomach aches became the norm. Shortly before Christmas of that year, there was a miscommunication between myself and one of the vice principals who told Dylan he was no longer allowed to call home. And that was the beginning of severe anxiety and school refusal. We spent the past 3 years trying to undo the damage that's been done to Dylan's self-esteem as we fought our way through the system. So many errors have been made along the way. Countless hours of meetings with classroom teachers, learning support teachers, principals, superintendents, board-level staff, advocates, social workers, psychologists, doctors, and tutors. So much time lost. We were never even made aware that there was a class that's intended to support kids with learning disabilities in our school board. I learned about it myself and pushed to have Dylan considered for the class. It was something we got access to after a full year, possibly more, of trying to convince Dylan to go to school at all. Another psychoeducational assessment was done by the school this time in order for Dylan to be recommended to the program. He was accepted, but sadly, anxiety kept him from making the most of it. When things got tough and he couldn't attend, we were met with shoulder shrugs and we're at a loss, we don't know what to do. And this was from the specialized classroom. The specialized classroom for children with learning disabilities, where none of the specialized work was scientific evidence-based support for reading, writing, or math, but seemed more focused on putting Band-Aids on the weak spots and using more technology to access and complete the work. So frustrating, and another year lost for Dylan. We can only imagine how different things would be if he'd been screened in kindergarten or grade 1 and offered scientific evidence based on early intervention before his self-esteem was crushed. Next year, Dylan really hopes to be able to attend the same high school as his older brother and his peers, but we have so much work to do before then and the anxiety dragon to slay. He has a strong family to support him, but why does it have to be so hard? Why does it seem to be an unreasonable expectation that our public education system teach all children to read? Somehow it needs to be more clear whether our public education system intends to include and support all students so that they have a chance at becoming successful and with their self-worth intact. If not, what is the alternative that is affordable and accessible to all?
Thank you. So you told us about the impact that failure to remediate learning disabilities had on Dylan's mental health and wellness, and it sounds like that at some point has become its own issue.
It has.
That maybe is driving a lot of what's happening right now. What has the impact been on your family? And I understand you have another child as well. What has been the impact on you as a family and on your other child as well?
As a family, it's incredibly stressful because you've now got everything that every adult here is responsible for in general, jobs and mortgages and all these kinds of things. Plus, you're now the main support and the main source of education for a child who the system has lost. The system has let them slip through the cracks, and school isn't really an option at this point because it triggers so much anxiety. It's almost like PTSD itself, the reaction that Dylan has to walking into that building. So there's that on top of jobs and everything else, and then the tutors and doctors and counselors and everything else that you're trying to juggle. It's incredibly stressful. Luckily, my other son is the most laid-back kid in the world, and he just kind of rolls with the punches, so that is a good thing, or else he'd be suffering as well, and he probably is to some degree, but he's been able to cope.
It had to happen eventually. One thing that you said that really struck me is that you said you became that parent, and I think probably a lot of people know what that means, but Can you describe what that means in terms of your relationship with the school and the struggle that involved?
Yeah, it's not really a comfortable person to have to be. You assume that when you send your child off into school that they're going to be loved and supported and make connections and have what they need. And when you don't, you do have to become that mom, the advocate, and the one that's pushing. And I learned from one of the best. I don't know how many emails I've sent. I don't know how many phone calls I've made. I don't know how many times I've reached outside of the school level to the board, to the trustees, to anyone who would listen, because it's just not okay that these things are happening in our system. And people need to know, and we need to bring attention to the problem. But yeah, you do get a label on your back as well that oh, here comes Dylan's mom. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So after our next speaker, we will take a 15-minute break. And our next speaker is Morgan Farnell and daughter Alice.
Hi, my name is Morgan Farnell, and I have dyslexia. I always thought I was going to do something great in my life or something really important, and I believe tonight is that moment. Most of my adult life I was spent trying to keep a secret. I felt ashamed that I was dyslexic. And my story begins in grade 2, which I failed. So I started the next year in grade 2 again, and I was removed from my classroom and put into a classroom called special ed. And in this special ed classroom, I learned a great deal about a computer game called Oregon Trail. And the one thing I didn't learn was learn how to read. And I didn't understand why. I didn't understand because I knew I was bright and intelligent deep down inside, but I wasn't given the chance. And that made me very upset, and my aggression level increased. I remember going out into the playground, and kids would tease me, "You're a special ed kid, you're a special ed kid." And I remember fighting with people, and this is the way my elementary life would go. And eventually, I made it into grade 6, and I had sports teams I could try out for. And I took all my anger, my rage, and I put it into sports, which I was quite good at. And the other thing I learned how to do, I learned how to lie. I lied a lot. Every time I was given a written test, I only wrote what I actually knew how to spell, or the words I memorized. I didn't actually write what I knew. And I did this for pretty much my whole entire education life. And eventually, I had the opportunity in grade 9 to take control of my education, because no longer I could pick the courses that I knew I needed to make it to post-secondary education. And I took courses that were not recommended for me from the counselors. I also learned about alcohol. And with being dyslexic, being removed from your classroom, you're isolated, you feel lonely, you don't feel socially accepted. And with alcohol, I felt something. I felt I was able to make connections with people. And this alcohol abuse that I would have for most of my life, because I couldn't control it, and bouts of depression because of the isolation from grade 2. I pushed through all the way through school and eventually graduate high school and move on to post-secondary. And it was a struggle because one thing I learned post-secondary, I didn't know how to read. So I had to reteach myself kind of how to read, but now it's the 2000s, actually it was late 90s, and there's things called computers, so now I can actually do spell check. So it was a little more easier, but I struggled and I pushed through. Eventually graduated, and I met my wife. When I met my wife, we had our first child, which is Alice beside me. And I remember my wife being pregnant and the baby in the womb, and I'm like, I hoped that my child was going to be normal and they wouldn't have to go through the same struggles and roadblocks I went through. We had tests done when she was in the womb, and they all came back negative. I was really excited. I'm like, okay, good. She would start kindergarten, she would have some issues with speech, but it kind of went away. In the beginning or two, the teacher had concerns about her reading. She's also in French immersion, by the way, just to let you know. But we had some concerns, but it seemed to go away, or at least we thought it went away. My daughter would bring back report cards, and she got A's, and she did really well. And it was kind of hidden because she was kind of adapting, making strategies for herself. Eventually, in grade 5, my daughter was trying out for a competitive team, and she got a concussion. And after this concussion, she went to a moment of her life where she was really depressed. So eventually, we had to take her to a child psychiatrist. And this child psychiatrist said, I think you should get an education assessment done. Now, I'm lucky because I have a great job and the benefits paid for it. So we got the assessment done. And I remember the day that we got the report back, and the woman said, your daughter has dyslexia. And that ripped my heart out. I remember going back to work, and I broke down. I'm like, my daughter's gonna have to go through the same things I did. I couldn't be at work anymore, and I left. And I went to a park, and I sat in my car, and I listened to a TED Talk. And this TED Talk, this is the first time I actually knew what I had, because before I was always learning disability, but now I actually knew that I had dyslexia, because I never was told that. I listened to his TED Talks, and he's telling me all the positive things about being dyslexic, the creative thinking. And I thought about it, and I'm like, wow, that's why I'm actually good at my job. People would give me engineering plans, and they'd go, can you find a solution for that? And I'd be like, okay. And they would call it the Morgan Magic. Some people call it Morgan Magic. And I would come up with these crazy ideas, and it was because I was an out-of-the-box thinker. And I'm like, from that moment in the car, I'm like, I'm going to make a positive thing. And I remember telling my daughter, I'm going to use it like the Matrix, and I'm going to unplug your brain to the real world. And I'm going to let you see things differently. So I unplugged her brain. I said, you have all these great abilities. However, you're going to have to learn how to read. And they gave us some accommodations at school. She has a Chromebook, and she's able to sometimes talk her answers and extra time a test. But it's still not going to happen because I want my daughter to be whatever she really, really wants in life. So we found a tutor, and now we spend hundreds of dollars a month getting my daughter that special needs that she needs. But luckily, she's been positive, and I'm told her, in a couple of years, you're going to be like everybody else. You're going to be able to read because I'm able to afford it at this point. However, you're going to have your special abilities. Now, the reason I'm sitting at this table, the most important thing is I realized those people in grade 2, I'm pretty sure I'm the only one to actually graduate high school. And I can also tell you, a lot of those people, they had more serious substance abuse problems than me. And some of those people are no longer with us, and some of them are in jail. And this is the consequences that you're giving these kids if you don't give them the chance to read. And this is something we need to change as a society. Now, I grew up in a poor not poor, but a blue-collar town where a lot of people, it goes on from generations to generations because your parents cannot financially afford to give their kids help that I can. And it keeps on going on from generation to generation. And I know that my father grew up poor and he had no chance. But at least I had a chance because I was angry enough to fight through it. Thank you very much.
Okay. Would you like to say anything?
She might
Do you
answer
wanna
questions,
the
though.
question? Yeah, okay.
My daughter was at a ringette practice in this building, so she's a little sweaty.
Well, that was convenient.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I wanted to ask you whether, you heard your dad talk about his experiences and how much of that feels like what you went through, what maybe is different. How have you experienced school since you were diagnosed with dyslexia? What grade are you in now?
I'm in 6.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so it's not exactly like it's way away from where he was, like how he was taken away to a different class. But for me, like it's been weirder because like now people look at me a bit funny, like because like before I was diagnosed, everyone would make fun of the people with a Chromebook, and so when I got the one, I was really scared that I would be made fun of.
It's okay. It's okay.
So now I'm not taking away my class because I go to a tutor. But there are some people in my class who've been taken away. I'm not sure for what, but I have a feeling it's for like learning with another teacher, and everyone like is really confused on what they're going and make fun of that person, and I feel really sad about it.
So you can really tell that the kids who have accommodations or leave the classroom, that the other kids notice it and in a negative way.
Yes.
Yeah.
You're both so brave for coming here and sharing this with us, and we really do thank you for that. And we've heard already from speakers today. We know that dyslexia is intergenerational, and the impacts are intergenerational. I think you've really made an important point here that it just perpetuates and perpetuates. If the system isn't there to fix it and it's expected that the parents are to step in, what happens when the parents themselves have struggles, be it poverty, be it addiction, be it mental health, be it dyslexia themselves?
I'm lucky my wife doesn't have any issues, and she'd be the polar opposite of what I was in school, and she was actually classified as a gifted child. So it's quite, a lot of the burden goes on to her. But I don't know, I've been able to tell Alice about, and I've noticed it with her, like her creative, like she's unleashed that creative part, and she understands that it's okay. It's okay to be who you are.
So it's been a strength in the sense that to be able to talk to her about your own experience and help her understand herself.
And if the reason why I'm talking here tonight is I can't sit there and say you're gonna be okay if I'm gonna keep this secret and keep on being ashamed. So and I know at work, I've been asked many times to take a next level in promotion, and one of the reasons I don't, because it would involve a lot more writing, and I still have it. Like it didn't go away. Like I didn't really honestly learn how to read. It's been all memorization of words. So I can tell her that I'm going to stand with you, and we can go through this together.
Wow, thank you. Thanks.
So thank you very much to both you, Morgan and Alice, for sharing with us. We're going to take a break now, and after the break we have 4 more speakers, and we will start with Emily Moorhead. So Emily, I'm going to ask you after the break to just come straight to the table. Okay, so don't go too far. We'll take maybe about a 10-minute break and come back at about 7:30. Thank you. where were you on this list? Okay. Okay. Is it
Free.
free? Okay.
Yeah, just brings it down.
Okay, folks, we're going to start up. We're going to start again. If you can start taking your seat, please. Okay, good for you. Thank you. Okay, hi. Can we take our seats, please, and we will start again? Is Nika around? Oh, there's Nika. Hi, hello, once again. Just drawing your attention to the fact that we will begin our session again. Hello? That's what happens when you give a break. That is true. I mean, I can do the clapping. Thank you. We're going to start up again, please. So thank you again for being here. During the break, I went to get a drink of water and then realized immediately that I neglected to mention that we do have a number of supplies for artwork at the back of the table. And I was reminded when I saw a little girl already at the back of the table doing some artwork. So if you have children or if any adults would like to, we do have some supplies at the back of the table. If you can, it's basically about what does the right to read means to me. And we have been collecting the artwork or any notation that is left, and we will find ways to use some of them in our final report. So with that, Emily?
Ready? Okay. Hello, my name is Emily Moorhead, and I'm a kindergarten teacher in the Limestone District School Board, and also the mom of a boy who's now in grade 9 who has dyslexia. His name is Aiden. So I'll start, I guess, first by talking about my experiences as a mom with my own little guy at home. He started to seem as though he was having difficulty with reading when even in kindergarten, and I can remember saying to the school, "It seems like this is hard for him. It seems like he's not really getting this. We'll read these little books and he'll get to a word that he's read 9 times already and still not know what it is, even when it's the word look and it looks right at him." And they said, "Oh, no, he's a boy, he's fine, he'll get it, he's just a little young." And as a kindergarten teacher, I said, I don't accept that. I don't accept that for my own students, and I certainly don't accept it for my son at home. And so we sort of carried on for a while, and in grade 1, he did not learn how to read, and we would both cry every time it was homework time. We'd be sitting and sobbing, sometimes yelling, sometimes storming. We got this plan that every time he got so frustrated that he wanted to cry or scream, he got to run around our house, out the front door, around the backyard, climb over the fence, along the sidewalk, and then come on back and sit down and try again. And it gave him a little break and a little time, but he was running way more than he was reading, a lot more. And so still the same thing, this is not right. But I didn't know what to do. I mean, I would have thought, and my husband, not a teacher, would say, well, you're the teacher, do something, teach him. And I was like, I don't know. I don't know what to do. I don't know what the answer is, because all the things that I would do at school, I'm doing and he knows, and that's not making any difference for him. So I don't know. And so finally we found a private clinic that did some assessment first, and then every day, 5 days a week, intensive one-on-one tutoring outside of his school day. So he would go to school in the morning, my parents would pick him up every single day at 11, take him to the reading clinic, he would do an hour of one-on-one tutoring and then turn around and come back. He missed math, all 50 sessions every single day. So he wasn't working on math, but he missed his math time every single day, and then came back to school, and he learned how to read. And I learned how to read so that I could help other kids too. So at the same time, the summer before he went into grade 2, I did a teaching course, I think 3 afternoons for teachers. And it was really also through the reading clinic, and also to sort of train teachers to help little ones learn how to read. And so I got really lucky, because we didn't struggle forever, and we ended up really being able to use that same information in 2 ways. It helped lots and lots and lots of kids, because I took that same information that I had learned from my own kid and applied it in a classroom setting, and it was miraculous. The changes in the kids at school were overwhelming. Right off the hop, they were keen, they were excited. My younger daughter was 2 at the time, and she too was learning all these little phonic patterns because she was hearing us work on them at home. And my son, from the very first day at the reading clinic, had this change in the way he felt about reading. So it was still hard. It's still hard, but he felt like he could learn how to read, and he sort of took that on. And now at 14, he's still reading at grade level. He's doing really, really well. He's in grade 9 this year, and he's finished his grade 9 English class with an 87 average. So it was really quite pleased for him. We're happy for him, and I can remember saying over and over to him, because this is hard for you, you have to work harder than everybody else. So he has developed this fantastic work ethic but it's not really fair either that he has to work longer and harder when it takes him longer and it's harder. But that's sort of been our way with him, and he's really mastered a lot of things because of that. He got really lucky too, because he was already involved in sports from early on, and then quickly that became a lifeline for him. So when he was accepted into a learning disabilities class and he had to leave his school and ride the school bus in the middle of every day to go to a separate school for a small program, he still had sports, and that was sort of a link to his other friends. And then the next 2 years for grade 7 and 8, he did a specialized program that was heavily technology-based, so that he could sort of access curriculum using technology. He learned to use the technology that was available to him in a way that was really, really helpful. So I can remember saying, okay, come in, I'll help you with this. And he said, no, Mom, I already know how to do this. And I said, well, I'll just help a little. And he said, Mom, that's not how dyslexic kids do this kind of project. And I was like, oh. Okay then, you got this, I'll just watch. And he did. We didn't have to cry anymore, everything kind of fell into place. At school, whole other wonderful story, I have lots and lots of kids in my classroom every day, and I get to teach every last one of them how to read, because I'm using a structured literacy program in kindergarten. And it's thrilling. I have these little tiny people who have never even heard of letters yet when they come to school, and all these little black squiggles are just little black squiggles, and I get to teach them one at a time, not one at a time kid, but one at a time each letter, so that then we can start to use those pieces and use them together and practice. So we do a lot of phonological awareness activities so that kids are hearing sounds and putting those sounds together, and then we start to put them directly to print, really tiny. Some of those kids are still 3, and they're already figuring out these sounds and putting the pieces together, and it is thrilling to watch them. It's so exciting and empowering. I have little people who feel like really big people. I had one little fellow one time who came in off the yard and said, Mrs. Moorhead, somebody outside called me a B-I-C-H. And I said, oh, that's dreadful. What did you say? And he said, I said, it should have been a TCH because it was a short vowel and a single syllable word. And I thought, yay, the power is so real that it's overwhelming. It's so exciting to watch them because I had a kid 2 weeks ago who said, Mrs. Moorhead, I think my name has 2 open syllables in it. I said, you're right, it does. Levi. Yep, you got it. But really, those are huge, powerful skills, and these kids are just lapping it up. And they march home and tell their families, oh, today I learned AI says A. When my son learned that in grade 3, his name is Aidan, A-I-D-A-N, and he came home from the reading clinic and said, I said, what'd you learn today? And he said, AI. And I said, oh, what's it say? And I'm like, okay. And he said, AI says A. And I said, well, that one should be easy for you. It's just like in your name. And he said, I need a sticky note so I can remember to tell them tomorrow. 8 years old. Like, it was new information for him, and it was part of his name, and he had written those 2 letters side by side in a word he already knew his whole life. And still, that connection had not been made until it was explicitly taught to him. And if that happened for my own kid, who had been exposed to tons and tons of literature his whole childhood, I just think we need to be explicit about what we're saying to kids about the way our language works. There are lots of confusing bits. English is really complex, but we have the power to offer it to them in little pieces so that they can see it, learn it, put those pieces together, and then use that. And of course, in a regular classroom, I have some kids who are high flyers who need about 5 introductions, and then they take off and they say, hey, look at that. OW says 2 different sounds. But I also have kids not even in that realm. And I have little teenies who aren't even close to that yet, but I still can say to them, gosh, I notice you often go to the bathroom when we're practicing our letters. Does it feel hard for you? And they can then say, yes, or they can say no, or I can say, it looks like it's hard for you, because I notice sometimes you wait for us to write down our letters, and then you write down what we wrote down. And then I can say, the best part is, I know how to help you. I can see you, let's work on it. I know what to do next. I know how to help somebody who's finding this a little tricky. Let's get to work. And so in my classroom, I have whole class instruction, I have small group instruction, and I also then will have short bouts of one-on-one support. And kindergarten is really great and flexible in that there's another grown-up in my room all the time. We have lots of playtime. We love our playtime, and I wouldn't suggest for a second that this is all I do, because we totally embrace the whole play-based thing, but I know that I have a job to do, and part of my job is to make sure that my guys are going to be ready for grade 1 and ready to feel successful as little learners. They don't come to us already feeling like they don't know how to learn to read. That comes from school. And so we have this, thank you, we have this lovely moment. Like, they all come in shiny and excited and ready to be there. I had one come in one time and whack me on the chest on her way by, and she said, you're gonna teach me how to read this year. I didn't. That was before, and I didn't know what to do, and that kid haunts me. She's fine. She's in grade 9 now, and she's doing quite well, I think, but she haunts me because there were always kids that I wasn't reaching, and I got lucky. I got lucky that I have a kid with dyslexia so that I could learn from him and learn from what supported him and take it all the way. And now I'm helping lots and lots of kids, and I have really happy families and happy kids. And they love it. They love it. It's
So, can I ask you, reflecting on Teachers College and what you learned about reading?
Yeah.
What was different about what you've now incorporated, and what needs to change in teacher education for our teachers to be able to do what you're doing in your classroom?
Right. So the kicker was, I think, that in Teachers College it was really about planning your day, and we were really, really heavy into balanced literacy then, and it was all about like how to do a running record. We did tons and tons of practicing running records with each other, but the fact is, when you're doing a running record with someone who's training to be a teacher, they know how to read. So they aren't making mistakes, and we're not using that in a diagnostic way to try to figure out why this child is falling apart.
Sorry, what's a running record?
A running record is when you would take a leveled text and the teacher would sit next to the child and put a check mark above every word they read correctly, the whole text. So, two things. Number one, if it's hard for you and half the time you're spending trying to look at what the teacher's writing down or look at how many not checks you're getting on there, not very fun. Also, those leveled readers that start as patterned books that we can memorize, or we only have to read a teeny bit and the picture matches it so clearly, like it is a banana and there's only a banana in that picture. You can't fail. The problem is you keep not failing until there's no picture, and then you really big time fail because you have no more support. And so kids are trucking along looking like they're doing really well and then tanking out because what they were good at was guessing the text, telling about a picture, memorizing. Sometimes, your mom or dad or teacher would read you the first couple of pages and you'd figure out the pattern, and then it would be look at the banana, look at the grapes, look at the apple, look at the... You could go on forever. Not reading. So Teachers College was for me was more that. It was more sort of learning how to put all these pieces, make sure you're doing writing every day, make sure you're reading aloud, make sure you're doing a big book, but it was not very concrete in terms of what to do to teach someone else how to read. And in general, those teachers know how to read, and for quite a few of us, we don't have any knowledge or memory of struggling with that process. Some people do, but a lot of us learn to read pretty easily and then cruise on through. And so then when you get this little person sitting beside you who peers up at your face and waits for the words to appear, we need to know exactly what the mechanics are of reading so that we can share those mechanics with somebody else. So now I teach one phonic piece at a time, and then as soon as we've got 4 or 5 pieces, I'll start to say, let's put this one and this one side by side and say this sound first and then this sound, and we'll make them sound like a word. So the kids might, we might have the letter I, like a short I sound, and an M, and we might read im.
So what would you say to the parents who say, well, my kid doesn't need that. My kid can read.
It's my favorite question. Every kid is benefiting. My kids are fantastic spellers because they love it. So I mean, there are lots of kids who take home a little phonic pack from school every day, and kids who are already reading. Like I have 2 who are reading well into grade 3 and 4 stuff, like chapter books, and they're flying around and I'd like to read Harry Potter, but there's a few words that are hard. Like they're those guys, and they're still. When do I get one of those packs to take home? I'm thinking there is nothing in there that you don't already know, but they love it and they want it, and every single one of them is benefiting from the spelling part. And early on, there aren't strugglers really and non-strugglers. They're all learning, and so it just I think narrows that gap of the ones who really don't get it and the ones who really do. It's relatively small in kindergarten, and then it grows really quickly. So those ones who are really, really going already don't necessarily have one-on-one time with me every day, but the ones who really need more practice from someone who knows get that extra little bit of time with me every day to make sure that it's coming along. And I know then that those kids have had at least 3 practices a day with me, and if they happen to go home and practice a bit more, all the better.
I have a lot, but let's try it. I might ask 2 in one. I think the question that I have on my mind is, how hard is it to go from not knowing what to do to becoming a teacher who can do structured literacy? Is it a complicated thing?
It's tricky because we weren't taught the vocabulary, and we were never in a position where we needed to articulate all the phonics pieces and all the morphology pieces. But in fact, in kindergarten, I only need to know so much. And as soon as you start to be interested in it, there's lots and lots and lots more out there. And so you can kind of just pick up little bits and pieces. And often it's the kids who push it along, because they'll say, well, wait a minute, what about, and it changes the direction a little bit and makes us go a different way because we kind of need to. I did, I think, 3 afternoon teacher course in the summertime. And from those 3 afternoons, there was no way I could have gone back to teaching my old way. Like it was a total game changer. And so now we teach a teacher course in the summertime, and it's 5 afternoons now, and we don't ever have teachers who don't say, why didn't I know this? This is all new to me, and this is the piece that was missing. And I think of all those kids. Usually by Wednesday, people get a little teary because they think of all the kids that they missed helping because they didn't know. And I just think when we know better, we can do better. And so it needs to be taught to teachers so that we can go out into the big world and do it on a broad scale, and not just if you happen to have this teacher or this classroom or this program even. It needs to be that classroom level first, because certainly there are some kids who are going to need extra programming, but it shouldn't be lots of kids. It shouldn't be most of them. It should be a very select few who are not being caught by multiple layers in the classroom. Reading patterned books is not doing it. It's not. We need to add some actual mechanics of reading pieces to that instruction.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Lane Gribben.
Good evening. I'm here tonight. My name is Elaine. I'm the parent of a 14-year-old student in grade 9 who she has a number of challenges in life. One of them is reading. She doesn't read at grade level, but she's a functional reader. Spelling is her absolute nemesis. I don't think she would be a functional reader and writer if I hadn't been aware of and heavily advocated for access to reading intervention. Her reading struggles have impacted everything from her self-esteem, her mental emotional health. One of the reasons she's not here tonight is because this is difficult for her to talk about. And she has asked that I don't name her or give any identifying information, going back again to the anxiety. It's affected learning, academic achievement, behavior, attitude. Her struggles have also influenced my own well-being, my own social life or lack thereof, my work, and even our family finances. So time and experience with her reading challenges, as we come to understand them, has taught us both that she's extremely capable. She absolutely has the abilities to become a competent reader. What has been lacking is a clear, sustained, effective remediation of lagging reading skills. That's what's truly impacted her life. Our Stories, like others tonight, has its own unique hurdles. My child has only one source of parental support at home because we lost her father at a very young age. She has not one but multiple diagnoses and exceptionalities, which are all hidden or invisible until somebody takes sufficient time to actually understand and learn the enigma that is my daughter. We also live in a rural community, so access to services and supports has often been limited by low staff retention, inadequate funding and resources, even high staff turnover. So we have traveled far and wide to access needed services. And while I'm here tonight to speak as a parent, I first learned about this inquiry by a professional association that I belong to as a speech-language pathologist. I've been practicing Ontario for over 2 decades, and the bulk of that time I have actually spent working within schools as an employee of a school board. My work supports and advocates for the development of oral language and early literacy skills. I understand how critical it is to build a solid foundation of oral language and phonological awareness skills, because this is going to determine a student's future success or future struggles with reading development. This work, as a speech-language pathologist and a worker in education, has really broadened and deepened my understanding of some of the issues at hand. And I've been on a big learning curve. But what I understand is that at the heart of this issue is that there's a real disconnect between what we know in research or cognitive science and what we actually practice in education. So present-day reading instruction is actually based on a flawed and disproven theory of how reading works. We know this from decades of research about what good readers do well. In the simple view of reading, good readers have many mastered skills, but they basically fall into 2 key areas. One is language comprehension, and the other is word recognition or decoding, the mechanics part. So reading comprehension is really the product of 2 things. One is being able to sound out or decode the word, and the other is to be able to understand what the word means. But rather than instructing our students in the skills required for decoding, how to crack the code and figure this out, we are teaching them to make educated guesses based on contextual cues. And this flawed theory of reading development is still driving instruction and still driving curriculum materials. The science on how to teach reading is very clear. It just isn't used consistently in our elementary classrooms. And even when it is acknowledged, there's a reluctance to apply the science of reading because it's not in the current curriculum. My child's prognosis for literacy skills was actually excellent in her first few years of life. She came home with lists of sight words and with pattern books to practice using context cues. With me for a mom, she had excellent oral language skills and above average phonological awareness skills. As she was an A student, she was in a French immersion program. But somewhere between the spring of grade 1 and early grade 2, my child lost many skills secondary to seizures. It took an inordinate amount of time and resources to first identify the cause of those seizures, find ways to manage them, and then rehabilitate a whole bunch of skills lost and regain them. One of those skills was reading, was early letters, sounds, sight words, and learning to decode. We've heard tonight that in the early primary years, that's that common understanding that in kind of kindergarten to grade 2, children are still learning language, they're still learning to read, but there's this subtle and substantial shift in that thinking underlying the curriculum as kids move into grade 3. They're no longer learning the language or learning to read. They're now using the language skills and their reading skills to learn. At this point, reading competency becomes critical to learning and academic achievement as well as continued oral language growth. My child was still recovering and healing. She re-entered school on a part-time basis in grade 3. She'd missed a great deal of school. She'd missed a critical window for learning. She needed more instruction to learn to read. Leveled books and PM benchmarks were introduced, but not effective. Her struggles with reading and writing negatively impacted self-esteem, her attitude towards learning, her behavior, and even her peer relationships. At home, we were both tackling mental and emotional challenges as each day seemed like a huge mountain to climb. She suffered countless hours at school in subjects, each with their own elements of reading and writing, constant reminders of what she couldn't do well. Yet, we started working on that growth mindset prior to school reentry. I knew then that simply the belief that she could do this was key to her willingness to keep learning. And as she had not yet learned to read, there was a lot at stake. So I'm fortunate in my work that I cross paths with lots of professionals. That means that I have access to information about what services are available through which agencies. And without that knowledge, I would not have known where to start or what to advocate for. All the assessments, which were done outside of school, were shared with school, but the ones that had the most impact in yielding actual support were neuropsychological assessment and occupational therapy assessments. One neuropsychological assessment advocated for the Empower Reading program, which actually existed at her school. In the fall of her grade 5 year, she began that program. It wasn't finished that year because of constraints, both on time and resources, but it did have a huge impact on her reading ability. It was the first intervention to remediate lagging reading skills that was offered. I'd like to believe it's not going to be the last. As an SLP working in a school board, I'm familiar with things like IPRCs and individual education plans. I understand the difference between accommodations and modifications. My daughter she was formally identified. She has multiple, both physical and learning disability. The individual education plan was introduced in grade 3. I've come to both love and hate IEPs. I love the concept that we can outline specific accommodations required for individual students. I hate the reality that sometimes those accommodations are unknown, variably interpreted, inconsistently available, or completely overlooked. At the high school level, At the high school level, there seems to be this added problem of diffusion of responsibility with multiple teachers involved in a student's learning. And yet I know that those accommodations are most effective when they're universally applied across teachers, learning environments, and courses. When IEP accommodations for readings were not, in my opinion, effectively or consistently implemented, modifications to her curriculum were introduced. And modifying classroom expectations for my child has been a blessing and a curse. Modifying the volume of work required and narrowing the focus to key concepts has helped with her learning and to reduce anxiety. But my child has shown consistent and documented strength with comprehending oral language. She understands what she hears, so there really was no need to modify content simply because of her reading struggles. The solution to that problem was simple. We just needed to accommodate by providing an easy-to-use tool so she could access grade-level text in subjects. These tools do exist. They are readily available. One example would be a pen-like device that scans text and reads it aloud. Another example would be accessing text via audio or video, as on YouTube. Unfortunately, the assistive technology and software that was recommended and provided was not easy to use, nor was my child taught to use this technology to the point of mastery or independence, both of which would be required. Mastery and independence would be required if we wished for all of her brain power to go into understanding the text versus figuring out the technology. The main barriers to learning to use that technology effectively seem to be a lack of designated time and human resources. So if accommodations involve assistive technology, then students must receive training and support to understand how the tools will help their learning and how they can use them efficiently and effectively. All struggling readers should have access to intervention aimed to remediate lagging reading skills, but they should also have access to grade level text across subjects. That's critical for students to continue developing their vocabulary knowledge while they're still working to improve their reading skills. My child has not had consistent access to grade level text over the years, and her vocabulary development has suffered. The decline is even well documented. We made a decision to leave public education midway through grade 6. My child was hungry to learn that year and make up for time lost. Her class that year was a very large core English group with a myriad of challenges, high needs, and little support. My child generated support time with her multiple exceptionalities, but very little of that time was actually directed to her classroom. After many unproductive school meetings and discussions, we were fortunate to find a tiny private school not far from home. The next 2.5 years had a significant impact on our family finances. Factor in tuition and travel, there's no busing to private school, and the cost was well over $30,000. I still consider it money well spent. The class sizes were small. The teachers had both time and resources to support her learning across all subject areas. She had access to remediation for lagging reading skills. She was well accommodated in the classroom, and the accommodations were universal and available to all students. They used Google Classroom and Chromebooks. This removed any stigma and provided great peer models and coaches for her. She was even able to access grade level text by following along with the class novel while listening to chapters read aloud on YouTube. These were golden years for her, where remediation plus well-implemented accommodations plus access to grade level text finally came together with extremely productive results. My child's most frequent and consistent complaint across the school years has been, I just don't want to be different. She is different. She has more challenges and hurdles than most to overcome. We've talked about this statement and the feeling really underlying it. I don't want to be treated differently. I do believe there's much that could have been done, can still be done, to bring strategies and resources that are universally designed for learning into every class. Necessary for some, good for all. If we are to effectively help struggling readers, then we need to move away from personalizing student differences and learning plans and move towards accessible classrooms. Classrooms where all tools are available to all students at all times. We need to consider how inclusive our technology really is. In my experience, if it isn't mainstream technology, it will often be stigmatized, ignored, and rendered useless. The difference, as I see it, is largely in how the technology is introduced and accessed. All students in her grade 7 and 8 classes had access to Chromebooks and used them throughout the day. And all students read the same novel, though how they accessed the text varied. My daughter's vocabulary soared in these grades because of that access to richer, grade-level vocabulary and text. High school is presenting new challenges for us, but the goal is still the same. Reading is a life skill, cannot be ignored. Instruction and practice must happen, whether that's at school or home. I'm acutely aware of the need for more consistent guidelines and services to support our struggling readers in order that they can keep accessing the same information and the same curriculum as their typically developing peers. We've been very fortunate to have some very well-educated and highly motivated teachers supporting her learning, both in the public and private education sectors. But there hasn't been a clear pathway for how we remediate weak reading skills beyond the early primary years. I don't blame teachers. You cannot change what you're not aware of. The first step to change is awareness, and once we know better, we do better. I believe that one of the biggest barriers to change has been a lack of awareness of a need to change from leadership, our policy and guideline creators provincially and in school districts. The institutions that train and graduate new teachers need to understand the science of reading. The Ministry of Education that creates curriculum and drives best teaching practices needs to understand the science of reading. Administrators and decision makers at district and board levels need to understand the science of reading and ensure that they have comprehensive literacy plans or roadmaps to guide what we do for struggling readers. These plans would consider early identification, access to interventions, at any grade to remediate skills, and implementing effective accommodations. Leadership could also proactively ensure that future research in science is carried into best teaching practices by strategically planning for crossover amongst their teaching program staff and their special education health professionals. This is where research meets practical application. The problem of how we teach reading exists across multiple systems and organizations. Change will start with the sharing of knowledge. Our time and resources, limited as they are, would be best spent providing the necessary teacher training and supports to understand the science behind reading and develop effective instruction. The year before my daughter participated in the Empower Reading program, we discovered that she had some left-sided neglect. Her vision was normal, but she ignored a lot of things on the left side. We didn't discover this easily. There were subtle hints in her reading. She would often begin sounding out letters in the middle of words rather than the beginning. This led to frustration since decoding only the second half of a word meant it didn't make sense. And while we were waiting one day for a neuropsych assessment, we were in the waiting room and she was drawing on the chalkboard. And she showed me a house she drew, which was actually half a house and only the right side. So fast forward many appointments and professionals later, and we had the visual field test proof. She could see on the left. She just didn't pay much attention to it. And I mentioned this incident with purpose. It took reading one-on-one with my child, paying attention to her decoding errors, and understanding the neurocognitive underpinnings of her struggles to first identify the problem and then to figure out a solution. The identifying the problem was the complex and the time-consuming part. The solution was simple. She was given prism lenses to wear. Lenses that would shift her entire field of vision to the left, forcing her brain to attend to and acknowledge it. And I say all this to drive a point home. Sometimes it seems to take an inordinate amount of time and effort to understand a problem, but the solution may be very simple. We simply need to look at reading development through a different lens, and the change will follow.
Thank you. You covered so much ground. It was amazing. I wanted to ask you, you touched briefly on being from a rural community, and I wanted to just ask you a bit about whether you feel that there are unique challenges dealing with a reading disability, whether in terms of intervention and support or psychoeducational assessments when you are in a smaller community.
Absolutely. I think the biggest difference is that I spend an awful lot of time driving places to access interventions, simply because they don't exist in our tiny towns. And even some of our smaller towns that would be nearby wouldn't necessarily have attracted health professionals that would be there for very long. So we do a lot of driving into Ottawa for appointments and to access assessments and services.
Yeah, I want to explore a little bit the point you made about collaboration and multidisciplinary teams. Speech-language pathologists are so knowledgeable. How can we leverage the knowledge that you and your colleagues have to work more closely with the teaching profession and pass that information on?
I worked with a speech-language pathologist many years ago in our board who described it, I think, it hit the nail on the head best, that often health professionals working in education feel like guests in the House of Education. And the two, program and teaching and special education and health professionals kind of run parallel. And I don't know that the crossover is going to happen unless it's deliberately planned by administrators. It does happen day to day as we kind of run into each other and work with similar students and that kind of thing. And I'm very hopeful this year, because this year, and especially because of this particular inquiry going on, that's enabled a lot of discussions. And I've seen far more crossover this year than I have in my previous 16 years with the school board. So I think there is hope, but I think that that definitely some deliberate planning, so that teams are multidisciplinary and include both teachers and health professionals would certainly help would help us keep the science in our teaching instruction.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we have 2 speaking spots left in this segment, and then we'll go to the open mic. So I will ask Linda Barbetta and Gordy Walker.
I am so grateful for this opportunity. I'm going to speak sort of from my heart, and I'm going to talk about the impact in terms of some of our anecdotal experiences. And my husband Jordy is going to, he's an educator, and he'll speak to his experiences. Michelle took my line, but I am very proudly that parent. I am. As that parent, you walk into a school and you know that you are being perceived as being difficult or challenging, God forbid, even emotional. I have been all of those things, and I am very proud to have been all of those things. I have 2 children. We're a little out of the game right now. Our children are 20 and 22. My daughter's at university, diagnosed with a learning disability in grade 3. My son is 20. He did not graduate, diagnosed again. I've heard here tonight a number of times from grades 1 to 3 we learn to read. Grade 4 we read to learn. We should not. My personal experience is that I spent grades 1 to 3 fighting to have the education system acknowledge that my children had reading issues. So for 3 years, we are fighting, and we are informed parents, and we are faced with defend, deflect, deny. And that seems to be part of the, I don't think it's an intended strategy, but I think it's where we have found the education system to be. So then you get into grade 4, and we begin to lose our children in grade 4. The education system begins to really, really run away from them, and that was the experience we had. I've done the public school system, I've done the Catholic school system, and I even did a private school. All 3 of them failed our children. Grade 5, my son spent circling the block, dry heaving or vomiting because he was so anxious. These kids go into school every single day with the single goal of self-preservation of their dignity. And that is an environment where you are reminded constantly that what you can't do well, and you may not be a successful person. I pulled out some of the lines that I have seen over the years in libraries. Today a reader, tomorrow a leader. Read to succeed. Learn a ton, reading is fun. Read and write to become a more wholesome self. If you can't read, you can't write. Reading is fun. Read or die. These are some of the messages in the narrative that our kids are faced with on a daily basis when they go into a school. And you can go into any school and you're going to find these reading posters. And if you're that child who can't read, it's not fun. Maybe I'm not going to be successful. Maybe I'm not going to be wholesome because I'm having difficulty with reading. I'll let my husband take over here because I know 7 minutes goes quick.
Thanks, Linda. Today I'm talking to you as a high school principal in Ottawa, a principal with a learning disability. In our high school system, as we've heard today, our education system is consistently failing these students, particularly with LDs. I don't think success should be random, and it shouldn't be situational on a teacher or a program or a school that you're at where you have an administrator who gets it. Unfortunately, many of our kids are going through the school system and they're randomly making their way through, whether it's successful. They're not MID, so then that's not to cast judgments on MID, but these kids are consistently failing. And look at our graduation rates. We would not get into a plane. We shouldn't be excited about 85% graduation rate. We should be excited about 100%. They have low self-esteem, low confidence, and that we give them when they come to school. And typically, by default, not by choice. We tell people in public education, you have a choice of 3 pathways. You don't have a choice. If you have a learning disability, in their way is the course selections that we give them when they come to school. And typically, again, I would ask you to look at the data that would support how many kids on IEPs are successfully graduating from high school, as we know that is not a very good number. And in those IEPs, accommodations don't teach reading. Accommodations do not help kids. Accommodations and technology and all of the fluff that we throw at parents when you come to high school does not work if you can't read. And so the premise has to be that we need to start where they're at and meet them with what their abilities are and move forward from there. I encourage you and I applaud you to continue advocating against people like me and working the system, because sadly, we also know that disproportionately our racialized Black students, our Indigenous students, our ELL students, and our spec ed students consistently do not meet the mark for years and decades. Decades. I'm a product of failure of a learning disabled student who went through the system and failed 40 years ago. And it's still the problem. Nothing's changed. I'm sorry. So keep advocating, keep using your voice, and don't ever take, no, we can't do that here.
Or we don't have the resources.
Yes, we're done.
So Gordon, I wanted to pick up on one thing you said about Black, Indigenous kids, marginalized kids. And I think what we've noticed in doing these hearings is we aren't hearing from those families. And yet we know that there are struggles and that, they aren't immune from dyslexia. Can you tell us why you think we may not be seeing those families at our hearings?
I certainly won't presume as a white person to comment on their behalf, but in my experience is, why would you come to talk to a bunch of white people about a problem that you know exists in your community that nobody's listened to for decades? And quite frankly, now there is a groundswell where schools are responding more so. In fact, this year, I think even more so. But those parents are frustrated, and they've been told, as many of you have been told, that we can't help you. And the minute you bring in race, white guys like me say, oh, this is not a race issue. This had nothing to do with race. And I'm in a position of authority and power, and I can exercise that. And that's a sad commentary on where we are in society right now when those marginalized communities don't feel they have a voice. But I would suggest that if you ran this again next year or the year after, those communities are gathering strength in an ability to gain a voice, to be heard by people like myself. And disproportionately, their kids represent populations in our essentials and applied classes. And they disproportionately fail those classes, even though they have average to above average intelligence. Like, how can educators not get that? I'm sorry. How are these kids failing? It's ridiculous. So that's my personal view, of course. But at the end of the day, there is not a reason other than they can't read. And reading is not rocket science. It is a program. It's a commitment. And again, back to the last speaker, the ministry's alignments for making to have attention to this issue in a meaningful way would solve so much of the harm that we heard from people like Morgan. That's just a train wreck that continues to happen every single year at graduation. Ask yourself how many of those kids are feeling like Morgan when he or she leaves the school board.
Can I just add something? I remember an incident where I had asked, I think my son was in grade 6 or 7, and I had asked who was going to teach my child to read. And I nearly fell off my chair when I heard the response, and I was told we don't teach children to read in grades 6 or 7. Or 9 to 12. And I couldn't believe my ears, but they don't. And they don't know how to teach how to read, because again, as our kindergarten teacher, who we would all love to clone, has said, Teachers College is putting out the wrong kind of teacher, or the wrong, focusing on the wrong skill sets.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Our final speaker in this session is someone who's actually just out of high school, not too far out of high school. So I think she'll be able to actually speak for herself about her own experiences. Ashley Judge.
Hello, and thank you for giving me this opportunity. My name is Ashley Judge, and I'm 18 years old. I'm from Ottawa and currently live in the town of Stittsville. Last year, I graduated from high school, and through all the three schools I attended, I was a student with the Ottawa Carleton District School Board. I'm currently a full-time student at St. Lawrence College in Kingston in the first year of Child and Youth Care program. I am identified with dyslexia, weak working memory, and specific learning disorder with impairment in mathematics, but I will get to that later. From grades, sorry.
I'm going to need a much bigger font.
From grades 1 to 7, my grades were typically B's or C's, but always weaker in subjects that had lots of reading and writing. There were no issues identified in my junior or senior kindergarten by my teachers. In grade 1, it was suggested to my parents that I be put in an after-school program run by the school to help improve my reading skills. While this did help improve my reading, I still wasn't at my full potential. I continued tutoring from grades 3 to 5, 2 to 3 times a week for my reading, writing, and math. While this did help keep my grades steady and help me give the techniques I still use today, I was still not reaching my full potential, but this seemed fine with my teachers. As long as I was not failing, everything was good. My parents would ask every single parent-teacher conference about their concerns regarding my reading and writing, but we're told things like, as long as she gets her ideas down and we can understand them, her spelling is not an issue to us. I haven't noticed anything, she seems fine, or try to read more at home, which didn't help since it was always a struggle to get me to read since I never enjoyed it and, according to my parents, extremely stubborn. In grades 2, my teacher was surprised when my mom told her she was concerned about my reading and writing. One year, when my parents attended the Meet the Teacher night, my mom told me as if it felt my teacher was attacking my mom with the issues I was having, but not suggesting any resources or what my mom could do to help me. My mom believes that the teachers who were most surprised by my struggles were the teachers I liked the most and put the most effort in trying to ask for help, since I was always known for being a quiet student. It always came back to the teachers in school offering no suggestions or support. When my mom had asked about a psycho-assessment being done through my school board, she was told it would take a while for me to test it since my learning struggles were not as severe as compared to other students. My first memory of realizing I was different from other students in my class was when we were doing reading benchmarks, or the running tracks, as I just learned, in grade 4, and everyone was getting called to the class to read one-on-one with the teacher to see where our reading levels are. Some may find it odd, but I enjoyed being able to go out and try my best to get out of class, obviously. As I was sitting quietly, waiting my turn, the teacher walked back in. I was never tested that year, grade 5 or grade 6. I felt like an outcast, ashamed of myself for getting my hopes up and stupid. When we had Education Quality and Accountability Office testing, commonly known as EQAO testing, I remember crying to my mom the night before because I was so stressed about how I was going to do on the test when it came to my reading and writing sections. For grade 3 and 6, my marks came back as getting provincial standards for reading and writing. When it came to middle schools, my grades became weaker, and it seemed as if I was always struggling to keep up with others. I always felt as if my teachers were disappointed in me because I always had a positive attitude and didn't ask for help. In grade 7, my friends and I had joined a reading club that my teacher had started. We had to read 7 books in a certain amount of time, and we were able to go on a field trip. I never read a single book, but handed in all the forms that I had so I could go on the field trip, and it worked. In 2015, when I started grade 9, my grades did a full 180, and I was getting low 60 to 70. My mom describes this time as everything just hit a wall. I never understood why I was not doing as well as my other classmates. I felt alone. I felt as if no one wanted to help me succeed, and I felt ashamed to ask for help or even talk to my peers and my family about me struggling. It was requested from my grade 9 academic science teacher to have a parent-teacher meeting after a low 70 mark on my midterm. She said she had concerns when it came to me understanding the questions and thought it would be a good idea to talk to my guidance counselor about what to do next. I set up an appointment with the next week and asked my counselor what I could do. I again got the answers that since my grades were not technically horrible and other students were struggling more than me, that I would not be assessed by the school psychologist until grade 12 or ever at all. That would have been 3 years later than when I asked. My parents and I decided to go the private route. We got a suggestion of a psychologist that used to work with the school board and would know exactly what terms to write for my assessment and what the school could offer me. We waited 3 to 4 months for the assessment, and thankfully with my parents' benefits, there was some coverage, but we still had to pay the rest. As said previously, after the assessment, I was identified with dyslexia, weak working memory, and specific learning disorder with impairment in mathematics. After the assessment, I finally felt a weight lifted off my shoulders, and I would finally get the help I needed. My accommodations ranged from extra time, use of a computer, and duplicated notes. I was finally able to do well in school. I wouldn't lie and say all the struggles throughout the years did not bother me. One of the reasons I started seeing a psychologist in grade 11 for mental health reasons was because I needed to learn it wasn't my fault for struggling all those years. Being distanced from my peers and family of the stress I was put on from school, and all I could do was move on and share my story. In the last 3 years of high school, I passed the literacy test on the first try with a mark of 340 out of 400. I made honor roll society in grade 11 and grade 12. I received 2 scholarships from the school at graduation and completed the health and wellness specialist high school's major program. I let my struggles turn into motivations to do things I was told I was not capable of doing by my teachers. I would like to end my presentation with a story from when I was a grade 11 co-op student at an elementary school. I was assigned to help a student who was struggling with her reading every day for 10 to 15 minutes during class with an iPad. Halfway through one of our readings, the student turned to me, upset, and said, "I hate reading. It makes me feel stupid." It broke my heart to see a student I saw myself in feel the way I did when I was her age 9 years prior. I know I can't change my past. I can only move forward and be as positive as possible, but I'm hopeful there will be a change for an open and helpful future with our school boards. It's time for change.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your story. I'm so impressed that you are on the honor roll and that you're in college. And I want to ask you, how did you, after grade 9, when you got the assessment, what shifted? You said you got technology, but it sounds like you also increased your reading ability, and I wanted to know how you did that.
I always felt, especially doing the tutoring early on, I always was able to, I never found reading as difficult. It was more understanding the concepts when it came to it. So I needed more time. I needed more time on my assignments to be able to understand what the questions were saying, and especially on tests too. So I feel like just using the techniques I learned, thankfully, from my tutor every single day, and making sure I keep on track of what I know of my assignments and keeping organized really helps.
I think that's an important point, that not all reading disabilities manifest itself in the same way, and for you it wasn't the phonological awareness. It sounds like it was about understanding what those texts meant or taking more time to do that.
Yeah.
I think you've been very inspirational today, so thank you for that. And I think you're hoping to work with kids in your career as well. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you're hoping to do?
I am hoping to, after finish my advanced diploma, to go either get my bachelor's of child and youth care or a bachelor in child studies. I want to be able to stand up for those kids who are all like me, be able to help them be positive through all of this stuff that happens, and be able to let them, like, you know, just be themselves and not have to feel like there's so much pressure on them like I felt. And I would like to work probably with the school boards, hopefully, and be able to help with that change. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I know it's been a long evening, but I believe it's been a useful, long evening. And we're glad and thankful to the speakers who shared with us tonight. If you indulge with us a little while, we're now into the open mic session. I have on my list 10 speakers. We may or may not get through all. We will do our best to get through all. So I will ask the speakers in this session to really, as much as possible, get to the point in the shortest time you're able to. So the mic is on the middle aisle here, and I will ask Sherry Storrison to begin. Sherry, you still here? Yep, I think she's coming to the mic.
Hi, my name is Sherry Storrison. I am the very proud mother of a 14-year-old who is with the Upper Canada District School Board. She has been there since JK. She's currently in grade 8. We were a family who was fortunate to have a psych ed assessment done through the school. Unfortunately, it did not provide an accurate diagnosis of dyslexia, so therefore it did not provide any effective remediation. We were fortunate enough to be able to do private testing at the age of 9. As we left that, my daughter said, "Thank you. I know that was really expensive, but I always knew I was smarter than they said I was." I know we're here to talk about reading, but I'd like to talk about some numbers. My daughter just completed about close to 5 years of Barton tutoring, which is based on the Orton-Gillingham method, which worked out to approximately 475 hours of tutoring. We live in a rural community, so it was about a 60-minute commute. When you do the math on that and you break it down into a 7-hour day, that's an extra 144 days of schooling that she spent to invest that time in tutoring. It's about $9,000 in gas and wear and tear on a vehicle. It's approximately $26,225 out of pocket for her to learn how to read. The total of that is $35,225. There's some things we cannot put a price on, like the sacrifices she's had to make for extracurriculars, school sports, because she can't stay later at school, missed time with her friends, missed time with her family. You can't put a price tag on a mother's heartbreak when at 6 years old she asked Santa to teach her how to read. Santa just isn't that magical. Sorry. The bottom line is that reading should be accessible to everybody. It shouldn't be an elitist privilege. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sherry. Jacqueline Freak and her daughter.
I guess I should start by saying we're actually from the Durham District School Board, not from the Ottawa-Carleton area. My name is Jacqueline. I am the mother of 4 wonderful children. 2 are dyslexic. My journey down this very lonely, dimly lit road began when I started to teach my oldest daughter to read. Being my first, I just thought all these struggles were normal, which is validated by her teachers. So fast forward to grade 2. We'd spent those 3 years following all the direction that was given to us by the education system. We practiced nightly sight words, looked at the pictures, 3Q systems, the leveled readers. She was reading at the lowest acceptable level to meet grade 2 expectations. No one was concerned except for me. There were so many things she still struggled with. She couldn't send out a 5 or 6 letter word. Her spelling was terrible. She hated to read and write it and always ended in tears. Olivia was not far enough behind to qualify for an evaluation. They said we had to wait until she failed. So we spent thousands of dollars on private testing. Her phonemic awareness was in the lowest 2 percentile. Even with these results, there was only accommodations like extra time, quiet rooms. There was no intervention plan. $3,000 later and no intervention. After dedicating hours to researching the science behind learning to read, I was fortunate to connect with an amazing woman who is well versed in the Orton-Gillingham program. Now, 3 years later, with consistent weekly OG intervention, Olivia is a confident young woman who is excelling in school. Her Genius Hour assignments was selected to be presented in front of the school. She recently won a class science project on analyzing the 4 aspects of flight. She has changed from a girl who used to cower at the thought of reading and writing to a young girl who is thriving and achieving consistent high marks in all subject areas. My third child, Benjamin, is 7. He is also dyslexic. And despite knowing what to ask for, there were so many red flags. He still can't rhyme. Anytime I question the school about screening him early or providing intervention, I am met with resistance. And in order to keep a healthy relationship with the school, I have realized I would just continue to implement all the interventions at home. So this once again leaves the burden squarely on the parent and none on the school. We are spending well over $500 a month. Learning to read is the most studied human behavior. We are fighting the very system which is supposed to be designed to support them. We like to applaud ourselves with some of the recent PISA results, but we shamefully ignore what I would say is the most important score, the one that shows that 14% of our children are not reading at a minimum level of literacy to participate fully in society. This number has only almost doubled over the last 10 years. Our children don't have time to wait while we reinvent the wheel. The science is there. This journey has been a lonely one as I learned to advocate for my children and not to just go along watching them fall further behind. It takes courage to break from the system and follow the science, but it is worth it. They all have a right to read.
Hi, my name is Olivia and I'm dyslexic. I came here today to ask for a change. The education system is always preaching an inclusion, yet they are leaving those of us with dyslexia behind. By the end of grade 2, I was no longer wanting my work hung up in the classroom. My writing wasn't neat, my spelling was terrible, and I had only accomplished a quarter of the work that my peers had. This was not a place for me. After 3 years of receiving an evidence-based structured literacy program, I am thriving in all areas of school. I'm on my 6th novel for the National Silver Birch Reading Program. I recently got 19 out of 20 on my spelling list, and I received an A on my most recent math test. Every year I have a new teacher that learns I'm dyslexic. The teacher sees a successful, bright student who can read and write alongside her peers. Yet I look around my class and see others who struggle with reading and writing. Do they understand the biggest difference between the students that are still struggling and my success is not intelligence, but that I receive a private science-based intervention? What I am is the face of potential, the face of what every child with dyslexia can achieve. Every child deserves to read. In an inclusive country such as Canada, learning to read should be considered nothing less but a human right.
Okay, thank you, Jacqueline and Olivia. Our next speaker is Hazel Harrington.
Hi, my name's Hazel. My husband, Matt, is here, and our son, Hudson, is in grade 3 at the OCDSB. We're here for Hudson. We're here with you today for him, so thank you for doing this. We noticed early that our very bright, articulate child was struggling with reading. He would often pronounce the last letter in the word first, insert an S where there was no S. B's, P's, D's would often be mixed up. He's a boy. Boys are slower to read. He's in French. He's learning a whole new language. He'll get there. He's such a smart kid. We know how struggling academically can affect mental health outcomes for children. We saw our bright little boy start to question his ability, his intelligence, and his worth. As he continued to slide academically in grade 2, we decided to have him tested. Testing, meetings, IEPs, IPRCs, meetings, testing, diagnosis. A learning disability in reading and written expression. His ability is here. His ability to show it is here. That sounds really frustrating, I said. It is, said the doctor. We have been extremely fortunate to have access to resources. We didn't need to wait for testing, we paid for it. We didn't need to wait for school resources, we found an amazing private tutor. We didn't need to wait, but so many do. I recognize that we have a two-tiered public education system. There are those that need to wait and those who don't. I hope that this is something that you're looking into in your inquiry. Hudson has 2 parents who can navigate the education system. I'm a lawyer, my husband is a teacher, and a special education specialist. Even uniquely equipped to advocate for our child, this has been one of the biggest struggles we have faced as parents. Our first attempt to develop an IEP resulted in no IPRC, no designation as an exceptional learner, and modified curriculum expectations down a full grade level. There was a recognition that this child was struggling, but no recognition that he is an extremely bright child. The solution offered by the school was to lower our expectations for Hudson. We refused. Our psychoeducational assessment, that we didn't need to wait for, demonstrated Hudson's ability when appropriately accommodated. Hudson is a smart child. It is our job not to lower our expectations of him. Our job is to ensure that he has the accommodations he needs so he can access the curriculum to the best of his abilities. I don't want to portray this as a fight with the school. It wasn't. It was a conversation. The reason I bring it to your attention is that there was an initial lack of understanding about the type of learner Hudson was. Presented with a very bright, dyslexic child, the first response from the education system was to lower our expectations of him. Were there gaps? Absolutely. Hudson had been struggling, unable to read throughout his whole school experience. There were gaps, but our job is not to lower our expectations of that child to be in line with those gaps. Our job is to advocate for this bright kid and raise our expectations to match his full potential, to give him the tools and supports he needs to thrive. Implementing the accommodations listed on Hudson's IEP has been difficult. I have so much respect for teachers, for their dedication to their work and their love for their kids they teach. I see it every day in my children and in my husband. But they don't have the resources they need to help children like Hudson. They don't have the training, as was demonstrated by our amazing kindergarten teacher who spoke, and I kind of want to move to that school district. They don't have the training, they don't have the time, they don't have the supports. I truly believe that Hudson's teachers want to accommodate him. They just don't know how, or they don't have the ability to do so. Similarly, there's a lack of understanding on how to accommodate. His teachers would say things like, he is very bright and conveys complex ideas and understandings, but I have to write everything down for him. Hudson's abilities and contributions are therefore worth less than those students who do not require accommodations commonly associated with dyslexia. This means that a child who is already working to overcome a learning disability is further disadvantaged by the accommodations that are meant to help him.
Hazel, we're just checking the time there.
Okay, I'm one paragraph. Hudson is doing well. He's working with a school resource teacher, a private tutor, to develop his reading skills. I cried the first time he read a 3-syllable word. I cried the first time he read me a page from a chapter book. I cried the first time he finished a chapter book. He still struggles with fluency. Reading is still hard for him, but he is a hard worker. He's an extremely bright child, and we will continue to be here for Hudson. So with respect and deep gratitude for the work that you're doing, thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Natalie Gallimore.
Yeah, hi, I'm dyslexic. And I'm the 4th generation that's dyslexic, and my kids are 5th generation. Lots of poverty in my family. I was the first to go to university out of all those, and we landed in Canada in 1782. So, what happened to my children was unexpected, to say the least. We had the family history. When they went into school, I said, can you let me know if anything goes wrong with the reading? Because there's a good chance something could. They sort of looked at me, well, don't worry about it. It's French immersion, we'll see. So in grade 1, I was put on alert for my daughter. They said that she had language confusion. I was no longer to read to her at home. I was not to let her see printed English words because I was confusing her. So I followed the school's advice. I didn't read to her. I didn't let her see the printed word. Grade 2, they said, wow, now she's failing in English. We've introduced English, and she's got D's in both reading in English and in D in French. This is not good. Can you think about moving her over to the English system? I said, no, it's not going to happen. They'd already asked my son, because he had been seeing a speech-language pathologist since he was 2.5. And when I enrolled him into the EFI program, I was given the look, and I became the mom. I said, no, he's staying. So we paid for the private assessment with a speech-language pathologist because, frankly, the psych ed was too expensive. I took it to the school, and they said, but we don't do IEPs here. We're a French immersion school. You'll have to move to the English program. And I said, well, but she has dyslexia, just like me, just like my relatives. And they said, there's no such thing as dyslexia. So the conversation ended, and we went solo. We hired a retired French teacher to provide structured literacy intervention in French. I did the English myself because I had to learn that for myself. And they managed to not only graduate high school, but they, with multiple exceptionalities for my son, finished the French immersion program and passed the DELF exam. So it's possible to go through with dyslexia and successfully finish EFI. So when I heard Decoding Dyslexia was having a meeting in Ottawa, I said, hey, I'm going to go see what's happened in the 15 years since my kids entered grade 2. Nothing. So I've become involved in this parental advocacy group across Ontario, and what we'd like to see from the Right to Read inquiry are 5 things. First, the curriculum has to change. In it is non-scientifically based things, and the teachers' colleges teach the curriculum. They prepare their teachers in Ontario to teach the Ontario curriculum. The language curriculum is wrong. It should be altered. The teacher training needs to change. We know better from the science of reading. There are documents going way back to the National Reading Panel report in 2000, right through to current day. There are literally hundreds of thousands of studies that say how reading should be taught. Neurology, genetics, neurobiology, it's all there. And it's not making it into the teachers. They don't know. They need to know, and then they need to know the appropriate evidence-based ways to teach reading so they can, all kids, when they hit junior kindergarten, can learn to read. Right now, reading instruction in the primary grades is not accessible to children with dyslexia. They can't learn. The way the curriculum's done, the way the teachers are taught, they cannot learn. There's no possible way somebody with moderate to severe dyslexia can learn. Then we move on to the special education. It should be based on structured literacy, just like the classroom instruction. It makes no sense to take them out of a special education into a separate classroom and give them different vocabulary, use words like phonics and decoding, and then send them back into their classroom with their classmates and learn a whole different approach to learning to read. Makes no sense. Let's have the same environment in both places, in the classroom and in the special education. Then we can move on to accessible technology. It's assistive. It's assistive technology. It's not the go-to. They need to learn to read. If they need to use AT for knowledge, that's another point. And that is a bridge while they're still learning to read. We have to be teaching them to learn to read from kindergarten through to grade 12 if that's what it takes, because everybody has a right to read. And we know that children with dyslexia can be taught to read. So we must put the structures in place that this can be done. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to pause here and ask your forgiveness if I interject as you're speaking. I'm just conscious of time, and we have about 6 speakers to go still, and I would like to get them all in a form if possible and still honor the time that we have in this space. Okay, so the next speaker is Jan McLean.
Hi, I'm Jan McLean. and I'm from Kingston, and I'm the parent of children with dyslexia. As you can tell, they're grown up by now, right? So it was about 30 years ago that I realized that my children were having difficulty learning to read and became that mom. And it was about 5 years or 8 years after that that the school said to me, well, you know, Mrs. McLean, your child's had everything we can offer, i.e., they can't do any better than they're doing. And that was the point that I really became that mom. And I was lucky enough to run into someone who sort of put me on to reading about the science, who put me on to private clinics that were doing work that was following the science. I went and read, and you know, this is now 25 years ago, the science of writing was saying, we have done the meta-analysis and we know what works, okay? And with that, I went off and took my kids to some private clinic. Sure enough, it worked. Came back to Kingston, talked to all my teacher friends, said, man, wouldn't you like to do some of this, right? And nobody was interested because it was all sort of snake oil. And I thought, well, so I got my friend, Jennifer, and she and I, we opened a clinic just, you know, following the science as best we could. And so here we are, you know, 20 years later. We've probably had, I don't know, 600-700 children through the clinic. We have 50 children who come every day. Most of them are coming an hour a day out of school time every day to come, right? We have a wait list of a year. You know, are we proud? No, we're sad. Clinics like ours should not have to exist, okay? I never started it thinking it was any solution. The reason to start it was to give parents some voice, because that's what did happen, is that parents were able to come and say, my child can learn to read. You know, they could go back to the schools and say, you told me they couldn't, but look, if I've got enough money and if I can pay for it, my child can learn to read. And since that time, the schools have come on board, they've started to listen. You know, Emily's had a really big influence. You know, the school board itself is trying to look in and help out with this sort of thing, because this has to move into the classroom. Clinics like mine need to close, okay? They should not be part of this solution other than to help show the way. And the time has come, 20 years, okay? The time has really come. And if you want my advice on where some of the biggest sticking point is, it's, as the last speaker said, it's back up in the teachers' colleges and it's back up with the Ministry of Education. Teachers are keen to change. I believe that most school boards, once they see it, they're keen to change. But you know, the teachers in the Teachers College, with the rare few exceptions, and I honor them, they don't know how to teach this either because nobody taught them. And if you have any influence to move up into those levels and get those levels to start to make these changes, get educated, you know, come for some learning, that would be the biggest, you know, really one of the biggest gifts of many that you can do. Thank you.
Thank you. Marion Zabriskie.
So I'm a speech-language pathologist in private practice working in Nepean at the Speech, Voice, and Language Clinic. I also am that parent. So 2 of my 3 children have dyslexia, and when they were in primary school in both Ottawa boards, there was no specific help available for dyslexia. They were offered the standard education model provided to all garden variety slow readers. The method was do the same thing that didn't work the first time, but do it only slower. So as a skilled clinician with a background in linguistics, I could see that this was not working and the approach was horrifically inadequate. So I had to roll up my sleeves and learn everything I could about dyslexia and dyslexia intervention, and I read every article, got every book I could get my hands on, and became trained in Orton Gillingham. I worked evenings and weekends with my children for many, many years. And I would like to say that not every parent can do this, and there is a huge price emotionally and financially. Literacy, as has been talked about, is a serious problem in Canada, not just Ontario. Students who are delayed in reading in third grade will likely remain poor readers throughout their lives. If left untreated, we know that 60% of non-readers drop out of high school. Our educational system is at fault, and here lies the negligence. Research has been around for decades on best practices for identifying and treating students with dyslexia. South of the border, there are only 2 states which do not screen for dyslexia in kindergarten and grade 1. So where are we? The stories that I have from my practice over the decades are absolutely heartbreaking. A grade 12 student reading at the 4th grade level, writing at the 2nd grade level. She was on suicide watch. A father who cannot read simple books to his toddler in spite of average to above average intelligence. A mother who's unable to help with her kids' homework at the grade 3 level. I once had a towering policeman in my office break down into tears. Why? Because of his dysgraphia. He spends hours after his shift writing up his reports. He has to triple and quadruple check his spelling, capitalization, punctuation, vocabulary, content, and accuracy for his reports, while his fellow officers are able to go home to their families and their children. So the shocking truth is that we have known of the imperative and the importance of early intervention, and treatment that is explicit, systematic, structured, and fixes what's broken works. It's not hard, we just have to do it. Every child has the right to proper research-driven instruction. While reading instruction costs money, non-readers and poor readers cost the country more. Let us all work together and be that change, one letter, one word, one page, one book at a time.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Catherine O'Shea.
I have to applaud you because I think you're the first person who pronounced my family name properly without me having to tell you how to say it. So thank you for that. So I'm a little ill-prepared for this. The last couple of weeks have been extremely difficult with my son, and I've been very preoccupied and didn't have the time to prepare something thoughtful like a lot of the other parents. But my story is very similar. One of the big differences in terms of everyone else that's spoken is the majority seem to be dealing with kids that are older than mine. And I have to say that what I've heard tonight is very scary. My son is currently in grade 3. He's 8 years old. He suffers from severe ADHD, sensory processing disorder. We suspect he has auditory processing delays, and as a result of his experiences in school so far, suffers from extreme anxiety. He has suicidal ideations, which he's had since he's been 6. And I just found out on Friday, I think it is, that finally we've been able to get a diagnosis of a learning disability. I am one of those parents. I've been one of those parents since before my son entered into JK, because we found out about his ADHD when he was 3. That's how severe it was. So I took all the steps I could think of to proactively prepare my son for a successful integration into school. I met with the principals of the schools that we were thinking of ahead of time, so the year prior to him being admitted to JK, to try and pick the right school, to make sure that I found the right principal that would understand his needs and be able to set him up for success. Provided them with all of the diagnostics that we had received over the years in the hope that they would proactively implement supports for him for day 1. To my dismay, they did not. Which of course I didn't really find out until a week before school was going to start, because I couldn't communicate with anybody until a week before school started. And it's at that time that I found out that I had to go through a multi-tier system before they would even consider implementing any supports, despite the fact that I had diagnostic evidence from various specialists about his needs. And we knew, as his parents, knowing him well, that he would not succeed in a regular school system in our community without additional supports if they didn't make modifications to their approaches. So fast forward, he was in an early French immersion program. Originally, I was hoping to put him in full French because I come from also French background and I knew how important it was for his future success. But after getting the diagnoses of ADHD and so on, I had a conversation with the French school that we had actually moved into the area to attend, and was strongly discouraged from enrolling him there. So we went to the next option, which was an early French immersion school. SK came, and knowing my son, we made the choice to only have him in half days in JK, and we spent out of pocket for a nanny for the other halves of the days for the entire year. Unfortunately, we couldn't financially afford to continue doing that come SK, so he was full-time. As the academic requirements or expectations increased, the behavioral challenges increased as well. And it very quickly turned into a situation where all they could see when they saw my son were the behaviors. Very quickly, and throughout this whole process, for those of you who are familiar with Section 23 schools, I had found out early on again about Section 23 schools, was a huge advocate of trying to access that early intervention window, and so started advocating in JK for my son to be placed in a Section 23 school. I got looks like I had 3 heads from the principals and the psychologists in the school because they couldn't believe that I was actually asking to send my son to one of these schools.
Yes, Catherine, I'm just checking in.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so I'm going to fast forward. There's a lot of information there, but one of the big things that you were asking for in your little cheat sheet for people who are standing here is the impacts on the family. We are all suffering from trauma. I liken it to PTSD almost. I now have panic attacks when the phone rings. I've had to take the last year off of work because my son got kicked out of the EDP programs and I couldn't function anymore at work because of all of the stress that I was experiencing trying to advocate and support my son. We continue to have challenges. My son is now in a Section 23 school, finally. He got in halfway through grade 2. I am terrified about what's going to happen when he gets discharged because he still does not have the skills. He can't read. He's 8. Can't read. Can't write. Finally now got a diagnosis of having a disability in processing speed and working memory, which doesn't allow him to access the curriculum. But moreover, one of the more important things that I want to state is that it's all good and well to put in place programs to help children learn how to read, but we also have to equip the schools to help children who have other issues like ADHD, sensory processing disorder, anxiety, which in and of themselves do not allow them to access the curriculum if the schools are not equipped to accommodate them appropriately. My son will not be able to access anything that you implement until such time as the schools are equipped to handle these other issues.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you.
Okay, so our final 3. And I'm going to ask you to come up one after the other. So it's Andrew Bradsell, Gwen Willems, and Melissa Langlois. Okay, in that order, please. So starting with Andrew.
Oh, sorry. A little bit taller, last person. Okay. I'm here representing my friend Trevor. Trevor is a 24-year-old who has participated in learning programs and has spent much time with tutors. Trevor still struggles to read at a functional level. As a friend, I have witnessed the effects of this inability to read. Despite having a college degree, Trevor has been stuck in precarious, part-time, minimum wage jobs. He is stuck in a 300 square foot apartment infested with cockroaches with not enough money to access exterminators. Suffice it to say, Trevor's financial future is much less certain than my own. Trevor composed the following speech using speech-to-text technology with some editing help from myself. His story focuses on the shortcomings of current programs, resources, and teacher training. And I hope he accepts that I went off script there a bit. My friend with dyslexia and ADHD has been told by teachers and psychiatrists that he will never be able to read because he has such a severe dyslexia. To quote Dr. David Kilpatrick, PhD professor of psychology, in a recent email sent to him, he said, "Too many people don't know how to fix more severe reading problems, so they make the faulty assumption that such problems cannot be fixed, which is simply not true." Due to my friend's dyslexia, he has spent most of his school career and post-secondary either trying to learn how to read or trying to overcome the barriers caused by his inability to read. In grade 8 and 9, my friend spent 2 years at a demonstration school, but unfortunately he made very little progress in his goal to learn to read. In the years preceding, my friend has invested much of his free time and his own money in the quest to learn to read. After many years of struggle, he decided it was necessary to research the subject himself. His research started with the consensus study report titled Preventing Reading Difficulties in Young Children by Catherine Snow, Suzanne Burns, and Peggy Griffin. In order to read the text, my friend scanned the document into his computer so he could use reading software. Based on his reading, he has determined that there are many gaps in education that literature has identified that school boards have failed to address. Teacher training in the Empower technique costs the province of Ontario $5,000 per teacher. If this program was adequate to allow teachers to effectively teach all students with dyslexia, it would be 100% worth the investment. However, Empower falls short. The way that Empower wants you to read a multi-syllable word is far too complicated and time-consuming, considering a dyslexic person or individual has a poor working memory and processing speed. To teach comprehension, Empower uses predicting, active prior knowledge, clarifying, evaluating through questioning, and summarizing. The weaker reader is just getting better at guessing. Also, one thing that Empower has very little of is phonemic awareness. There have been over 50 studies saying how important phonemic awareness is to teaching reading. So it is naive that they haven't included more of it in Empower. According to the book that I previously mentioned, children taught using phonemic awareness scored 30 to 34 standardized points higher for general reading achievement.
And you're just checking in, we're running short on time.
How much time do I have left?
Actually, you're over time right now.
Oh, dear God. Okay. I'll skip to the last paragraph. My apologies to Trevor. The current problem we have with teaching dyslexics comes down to two things: finding a program that works for everyone and having fully trained teachers. Using a phonemic awareness program that includes all 8 steps that I included somewhere in the speech, as well as providing a thorough Orton-Gillingham-based program is a great place to start. Orton-Gillingham-based reading programs are good, but teachers need more than just an introductory training course. Many private tutors admit that they become more effective when they receive the full training, which requires 1 or more years. My friend experienced this firsthand. He attended a demonstration school and was a victim of poorly trained OG-based teachers. After 2 years, he had not learned to read. At the age of 24, he still cannot read. That is devastating when you are trying to become a self-sufficient, responsible adult. The ramifications are endless.
Thank you. So this is Gwen coming to the mic.
Hi. I'm here to talk about my son Josh. So, like many well-intentioned Ottawa parents, my husband and I enrolled my oldest son Josh in a French immersion program in the Ottawa Carleton District School Board. By the time Christmas time of his senior kindergarten year rolled around, it was obvious things were not going well. He hated school. The teacher complained he couldn't do the work. We sat through several parent-teacher meetings where our son's academic shortcomings in language acquisition were outlined to us. Our son continued to hate school, and we continued to push him to try his best, but try harder, to listen more, and to pay attention more. we all became very frustrated. At some point before the spring report card, the English math teacher called me on a Saturday morning to warn me about the upcoming report card. As the poor academic marks were described, the math teacher told me, "I think something is wrong. He's trying, but it's not his fault. I don't think it's his fault that he can't seem to learn to read. Maybe you should have him tested." We were shocked, but her frank advice pointed us in the right direction. I would like to underline here it was not my son's homeroom teacher, a seasoned teacher who taught him the majority of the day, who reached out to us. It was the math teacher who had brief interactions with him. His regular teacher never considered or suggested that there might be something else amiss outside of Josh's control, and she certainly never recommended we get him tested. She just said he couldn't do it. Fortunately, my husband and I are reasonably employed, and we chose to take the psych ed assessment privately. If we had waited for a publicly funded assessment, I believe we would have waited years. The psych ed assessment revealed significant challenges in reading acquisition compounded by ADHD. It also revealed that he had low self-esteem and was depressed due to his challenges at school. At the time, my son was 7. Armed with our diagnosis, we approached Josh's teacher and the school principal and vice principal. Imagine our surprise when the vice principal eventually coughed out that there is no support for reading challenges in the French stream, and an extremely limited amount of reading support in the English stream. Without this critical support, Josh's IEP served him about as well as flat tires on an Indy race car. Further, the principal and the vice principal casually suggested that we modify, not accommodate, his curriculum to better ensure his chances for success. My husband is an educator and knew that modifying a child's curriculum was a major decision and could significantly impact his academic future. The manner in which it was presented as no big deal was shocking and completely irresponsible. They should be ashamed that they were so willing to discount my son's abilities and future when he was only 7 years old. I am lucky that because of my husband's profession, we knew to question and then ignore their advice. I am concerned others, less informed, would not. We pulled my son out of the French stream and put him into the English stream, where he could receive some support, but not consistently. There was a reading program, but not one especially targeted to kids with dyslexia. This year, the Ottawa Carleton District School Board removed the English stream from his neighborhood school, making it an EFI center. Students in the English stream were then directed to another school further away. For a variety of reasons, we elected to send our son to a different school, partially because it had an alternative program and it had Empower. But wait, there's only one teacher at this new school who is trained in Empower and very limited number of spaces available in the program. It is also targeted at junior grades, and my son is now in grade 4. It became apparent that our severely dyslexic son was not severely dyslexic enough to get a spot in the program. While he's not been placed in the program, his homeroom teacher is the trained teacher in Empower, so he does receive some support. But what about next year, when he's not in that class anymore? When our son was diagnosed, we knew that what the public system could offer in terms of support was woefully insufficient. We engaged a tutor from an organization specializing in reading challenges. To date, we have spent thousands of dollars in getting him support, and we will likely spend thousands more. What about those who can't? How are those kids supposed to learn how to read? My son is still not reading at grade level, and he still hates school. He still talks about his senior kindergarten teacher and how that made him feel. In conclusion, teachers need to be trained early on to identify reading challenges in students, rather than making the child feel terrible or ignoring the problem altogether. There needs to be more accessible testing, including financial support, so that kids with reading challenges can be diagnosed early. Support needs to be available to students in both English and French immersion. To not offer it is discriminatory. On a related note, creating English-only schools, which are largely filled with kids with learning disabilities, serves to fan the fire if sufficient support is not offered to those students. There needs to be support in schools to help kids with reading challenges, support in both specialized programming and teachers, note plural, who can deliver it. In the same vein, the IEP needs to accommodate kids, but also have an active plan about how reading challenges will be addressed. Lastly, schools administrators need to not suggest a modified program as an easy solution without properly explaining the consequences to parents. Thank you.
Thank you. And Melissa. Yeah, Melissa Langlois.
Good evening. My name is Melissa Langlois. Thank you. I'm here wearing several hats. I'm a mom, and I'm a teacher. I'm also a Francophone. My son, last fall, not this past fall, 2 falls ago, started hitting himself. That was extremely hard as a mom to see that. We finally realized that we had to search for answers. We started with our speech therapist who thought he was dyslexic. We had to put our name on various wait lists because there's wait lists everywhere. We finally got the one that we wanted, and it took 8 months to finally get a diagnosis. He's dyslexic. We got a nice IEP out of it. We've got accessibility to different computers and software, but there are no programs in the French system. They don't even exist privately. OG, Barton, non-existent. So even if I wanted to pay for it, it doesn't exist. Empower, I have it at my own school. I'd love to have my son in it. But why should I be penalized to take my child out of French school? He should have the right to have access to a good phonemic program, which he doesn't have. So what are we doing? We're paying and paying. We pay $130 a week for speech therapists in French. There's no Barton in French, so we've put him in Barton in English, hoping that the skills will be transferred. That's another $100 a week. So I'm sure you can do the math that it's quite expensive. I feel penalized as a Francophone, not having this access to good programming. I've had to tell my son this evening that it's important to learn to read and that mommy wants the best for him. And statistics show that if a child can read, they will succeed in the long run. So I found out about this great clinic in Kingston, and I'm going to be driving for 5 weeks every day, hopefully, if they accept me, to Kingston every day for 5 weeks so that my child can access a good service. As a French immersion teacher, in the start of my career, I'll be quite honest, French immersion was an elitist program. It was the cream of the crop. If a kid couldn't make it, you were encouraged to tell the parents that they can't make it and therefore they should move it to the English stream. I'm lucky now. We don't encourage that anymore. But the problem is we don't have the resources to help these kids. This year is the first year that I have 2 kids. I don't know how to help. I haven't been trained. I'm a little ashamed about that, but my teacher's college never showed me how to teach kids to read. I mean, I teach kids phonics, but some kids need more help, and I don't have the programming. So not only am I registering my child in this awesome program in Kingston, they also offer a teacher's course, which I believe the young lady right there mentioned. So I'm taking it upon myself to train myself to help my kids so that my kids don't have to leave the French immersion program and will have proper training. But it also means I'm going to have to learn the proper techniques in English and then transfer it over to the French. I want my students to succeed. I want my own child to succeed. And therefore, I'm here to let you know that there's a lack of programming. There is some programming for the English, but as many of you mentioned, not everyone gets access to the Empower or even the LLI. It depends on what resources are available at the school level, and it depends on the severity of the disability. So my wish is for more programming for both the English, but let's not forget the French community either. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you again to all of our speakers. I think we appreciate that many more would have liked to have said something, but time is up the limit. And so we're going to encourage you, if you've not already done so, to complete our survey. Our survey is online at ohrc.on.ca. It will be open until April 1st for the parent-student survey. So we strongly encourage you to complete the survey, because that will really help us as we continue in this inquiry, and it also allows you to put your voice, to share your voice and your experiences with us. I'm going to ask the Chief to come and make some closing remarks, and then we will wrap.
Thank you. I know it's late and it's a school night, so I appreciate you sticking around. I want to thank everyone who spoke tonight for your presentations, for sharing your experiences, your stories, and some of your really deeply personal issues with your family and your histories, so I really appreciate that. I also want to thank all the parents who've spoken. It's clear that you're here because not only do you support your own kids, but you want your experiences to benefit other children and other families, and so that is very, very appreciated and very generous. This is a culmination of 4 hearings that the Commission has put on across the province. And I think what I've been struck by is you guys don't know each other. You live thousands of kilometers away from one another, maybe hundreds, maybe thousands is too much. But so many themes have resonated across all of the hearings. And your stories really show how big this issue is, that it isn't about a particular board or a particular teacher, that it is really systemic in nature and even generational. I've really been struck by how many people have talked about their own experiences struggling with reading, 10, 20, 30 years ago, and how those experiences continue today. So I hope that your courage will inspire not only the Commission, but all of the actors in the education system to do something about this very serious problem. And especially for the children and families who aren't here, the ones who don't have the parents who have the time, the education, the ability to do what you're doing today. And I really hope that those people who may be struggling on their basic needs, or maybe newcomers, or just aren't able to be here tonight, that these stories in some way make a difference in their lives as well. I think that fundamentally, if our children can't learn to read in school, there is something very wrong with our education system. We called this hearing the right to read, but I think that the stories today really speak to it being about a right to a childhood and ultimately a right to a future. So thank you so much for giving our inquiry team so much to consider, and especially in this group from the Francophone Perspective, really appreciate hearing your stories and helping us see not only the big picture, but the impact it has on your lives every day. And I hope that together the Commission can do justice to your experiences and bring about the kind of change that you have to be that parent to advocate for. So hopefully the Commission can be that Commission. So good night and travel safely, and thank you so much again.